Okay, we will start the meeting with apologies for the late start. We do roll call.
Cohen.
Here.
Mendoza.
Here.
Milpern. Hernandez.
Here.
Chow.
Here.
Cartha.
Here. We get the approval of the meeting agenda.
I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Second.
Cohen.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. We have our high five recognitions.
A couple things. We have a round 65 and then the district recognition. So I'll do two things. Good evening, everyone, and apologies for running a few minutes late. Let me start with around 65 and note that this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And it's a special week for all of us associated with the district, for all of us whose children are part of the district or children who were part of the district. And I just want to publicly do a deep thank you for the work that our teachers do day in and day out. Their focus is on our kids. There's a commitment and a rich commitment to equity and continuous improvement. And it's just something we should celebrate Teacher Appreciation Week every week, but specifically this week. And I just want to tip my hat to the 800 teachers who are part of District 65 family. I want to also note a couple issues around or a big issue around our equity agenda, and really the equity agenda here in Evanston and Skokie, or in Evanston Township. Most recently, a group of over 30 city organizations embraced a statement around equity. And if I may, I'm going to read that statement and share it with the community. So the statement says, this April, over 30, that was the heading to it. The statement is, from the community, Evanston community, over the past several years, leading institutions across Evanston have embraced an equity agenda focusing on addressing issues of race, racism, and bias. We have stepped forward to have honest and open dialogue and discussions about racial equity. We have also stepped forward to offer racial equity training opportunities that include, among others, Beyond Diversity and SEED training. We realize that these trainings and discussions are not easy and uncomfortable for some, yet we recognize that the potential to change our institutions so that they truly belong to people from all races and walks of life requires focused and sustained commitment to addressing race and equity head on. In recent weeks, several individuals have publicly criticized our efforts. As leaders in Evanston, we stand in strong support of our equity work and will continue to engage citizens in open and honest dialogue about race. And by doing so, we will create a socially just and welcoming Evanston where all people of all backgrounds have opportunities to fulfill their true potential. And as I started, this is signed by 32 organizations in Evanston. It's posted on our web and on the various websites of the organizations around Evanston. And so I just want to salute the multiple institutions who are behind the work that we are doing. Now, it's my moment to on behalf of the board and the administration, to recognize our May High Five winners. And so I do have the pleasure of announcing our May recipients of the High Five Celebrating Excellence in District 65 Staff Recognition Program, which honors the tremendous work of our licensed staff members and educational support staff. Special thanks to First Bank and Trust for their generous support of the High Five program. Through this sponsorship, we are able to provide our staff with a $75 Visa gift card, a framed recognition certificate, and an invite to this month's celebratory luncheon for all of this year's recipients. I would now like to invite our May recipients to the podium. Ms. Sue Takaki, speech language pathologist at Dewey School, and Mr. Rafael Gonzalez, custodian at Lincoln School. And I love The resounding applause for both of our high five candidates. Both have made an incredible impact on our students and families in the years that they have been part of District 65. Following both of our recognitions, I would like to invite Board President Suni Kartha up for a photo with our recipients. Mr. Gonzalez is a valued member of the District 65 team and was nominated separately by both Margaret McKay, a parent of the district, and District 65 staff member Jeannie Chase, who will join us at the podium to share some remarks.
Am I going to go first?
Yes, please, and if you would talk in the microphone.
Can you hear me? So I'd like to start with a quote by Edwin Hubble Chapin. It says, "Every action in our lives touches on some chord that will vibrate in eternity." It is with great pleasure that the Lincolnwood community comes together to honor our unsung hero and watch that vibration happen. Mr. Gonzalez takes great pride in helping our kids, maintaining our building and grounds, not to mention his unrecognized roles at Lincolnwood School. It's not unusual to see Mr. G sitting at the front desk, opening the door for early arrivals and answering the phone and answering questions. We see him jump into emergencies, large and small, with commitment and compassion. He knows everybody by name, connects with everyone in some way. He is a friend, mentor, counselor, role model, and father figure to our kids and our staff. Mr. G goes above and beyond every day. He is everywhere. He happily cleans up our messes, fixes what we break, and does whatever is necessary to help the kids. He assists and attends all PTA functions. He plays with the kids. He greets parents and students in the morning at the parking lot. He has stepped in to help students in crisis and to support teachers. He goes to Camp Timberley with our fifth graders. He has shaved and dyed his hair to support our school. He makes cameo appearances in our fifth grade video. There is literally nothing he would not do for anyone in our Lincolnwood community. Mr. G, you are the pulse of our school, our students, and our staff. If there was ever any doubt, let me put it to rest. You are and will always be appreciated and loved at Lincolnwood School.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Lincolnwood PTA. Where Mrs. Chase said that Mr. G is the pulse, I said he was the heart of our school. Besides just the day-to-day stuff that he does, I reached out to some parents when I was writing the nomination, and here are some of the things that they said. One parent shared, sorry, I'm really gonna get a little verklempt, but one parent shared that her son, when he was in fourth grade, was having a tough time, and Mr. G would call her or send her a message and just say, "I checked in on him and he's okay today. So he's gonna be fine, he's fine, you're fine." And it just would, any of us that have parents in school, it's a point of letting go, and he constantly watches over these kids, whether it's parking lot duty, whether it's cleaning up our playground. We are next to Hubbard Woods, which apparently is a nice place for teenagers to hang out, who knew? So he cleans up after us, he's there for us, he shares with us. I mean, he's kind of our school husband. We love him so much, and we could not, I mean, I'm not wrong. There's a Lincolnwood contingency here tonight. He does everything for us, and he always has a smile on his face, and our gratitude is, we can't even show it. So I hope that you know how much we love you and appreciate you. Okay.
You guys, thank you so much. I don't know if I'm gonna cry, but thank you. First off, not every day, you get a call in the evening from Ms. Davis. I was very nervous when she called. Like, oh my God, what did I do? Or what happened at the school? But getting back, thank you so much, guys, for the kind words. You guys just touched my heart. I mean, you guys always touch my heart, but really tonight, all the stuff that you guys said is just wonderful. I have a model, but I respect the teachers so much, that when I started here, I was in Nichols, and it started back then, and it just continued. That you guys are it starts from you guys. It really does. And you guys are unbelievable every day. We all have children, not all of us, but the majority of us, 1, 2, 3. And you know how it is with 1, 2, or 3 kids at home. These teachers are dealing with 20+ different mindsets every single day. So I took my model to say, I have to do something about this any which way possible to help you guys have whatever you guys need so you guys can have for the day a great day. And you guys, most of you guys know that, but I take my hat to you guys, seriously. You guys are the heart and soul of this district. And I always tell a lot of folks too, please don't ever forget what we're in this business for, ever. For those little ones there. Okay, but thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chi. Don't leave us, but you can go sit down if you want. But we want to give you your award. So it's also my pleasure to recognize Sue Takaki, who was nominated by District 65 parent Amber Rhodes and nominated by second grade Dewey student Vera Mae Nolan, who are unable to join us tonight, but they have shared the following remarks. Amber Rhodes notes that during this week of teacher appreciation, we are so pleased to share our excitement about the selection of Sue for the High Five Award. It is, in fact, one of her trademarks to give her students high fives for good speech as motivators in reaching their goals. Her unwavering support through communication and patience with our son's therapy process, which is likely a bit more challenging than most since he was born with bilateral hearing loss, truly elevates her to that exceptional level. On numerous occasions, Sue has made what feels like immediate contact with us should she have concern over something at school involving our son. We reflect often on just how lucky we are to have Sue advocating for our son and constantly looking for ways to optimize his learning environment and experiences, not only in the speech therapy sessions, but also in the classrooms and specials. District 65 and Dewey School community are so fortunate to have her. Second grader Vera Mae Nolan shares that Ms. Takaki is awesome because she helps me learn how to say th, sh, s with pride. It's underlined here too. I like when we play games too. She helps me feel like a good version of myself. One more time. Ms. Takaki also makes me believe I can do better and be a better person. She's all the Dewey Do's wrapped up in one person. On behalf of the school board and the administration, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both Mr. Gonzalez and Ms. Takaki for all that they do for Kingsley and the King Arts community and the Dewey community. Oops, sorry, I have the wrong script, so sorry. We love the fact that you work on those schools too, but it's also Dewey and Lincolnwood, so corrected. President Cartha and I will come and award you your gift certificates. Sue, if you wish to say a word, you're more than welcome to. And if you don't, that's fine too.
I asked our previous Dewey School winner if I had to say anything, and she said, no, just say thank you. And I had to follow this amazing okay. But I have to say, I didn't shave my head, but I do dye my hair. And I work with the most amazing students and the most amazing parents and teachers, and I get to call it work. So thank you very much.
That concludes my happy report from around District 65.
Thank you, those were amazing. Well, we get another happy presentation with the Phyllis Ganser Awards. So can we have the team come up?
Good evening. My name is Corky Siegfried, and I'm substituting for our usual presenter, Sue Ganser Levinson. Sue is out of town, welcoming her new granddaughter, who was born last week. The Phyllis Ganser Award was created during the 1999-2000 school year to recognize Phyllis Ganser, an active and enthusiastic volunteer with PTA and PTA Council. Phyllis, the mother of 3 children in the Evanston-Skokie schools, had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1997. She had periods of remission during which she pursued her activities in the community, including being co-president of the Walker PTA. Unfortunately, her disease was metastatic and she lost her battle with cancer in January of 2000. At the time, her son David was a freshman at ETHS. He is now a computer consultant for the management consulting firm in Portland, Oregon. Her daughter Jessie was in 5th grade at Walker School at the time of her death, and her son Adam was in 1st grade at Walker. Jessie is attending graduate school at the University of Michigan, working on a Master of Social Work degree. And Adam, a 2015 graduate of Hamilton College, is employed as a software developer by Epic Systems Corporation in Madison, Wisconsin. They are all doing well. Having served on the PTA Council with Phyllis in the late 1990s, it is my honor and privilege to be part of the committee that solicits nominations for the award, reads the wonderful recommendations for always more than worthy nominees, and to participate in the very difficult choice of 1 or occasionally 2 award recipients. My fellow committee members are Laura Vogel, Laura Antolin, Deborah Wood, Donna Lee Floater, Katie Hart, Miriam Barnett, and of course Sue Ganser Levinson. Now to make the presentation of this year's award, I'd like to introduce Donna Lee Floater, a committee member and also a past award winner of the Ganser Award herself.
Thank you. The award, I need my glasses. The winner is selected based on the following criteria. The nominee must be a member in good standing of the PTA, exhibits a commitment to the PTA goal of promoting the welfare of all school children, a willingness to work in any capacity, even behind the scenes, a spirit and enthusiasm for volunteer work, a demonstrated ability to engage and involve other volunteers. The selection committee once again is in awe of the impressive accomplishments of this year's group of nominees from schools across the district, and we commend them all. I'll briefly mention their names, and if anyone of the nominees is present, please stand. Julie Cutter, Dewey and Nichols School, nominated for her work at Park. Jody Ford, King Arts and ETHS. Libby Harrison, Willard. Shannon Lang, Dawes and Chute. Antja Mangold, Washington and Nichols. Nicole Marks, Haven and ETHS. And Nicole Marks and Nancy Marshall were nominated as a team, Willard, Haven and ETHS. Jean Noon, Lincoln School. Erin Sakluti, Walker School. And Isabel Schultz, Lincolnwood and Haven School. Nominated by Amy King, Margaret Story, and Christy Schlacks, this year we have selected someone who has proven the value of employing the PTA as a vehicle and a partner for accomplishing great things in the Park School community and for District 65 as a whole. Her nominators describe Anna as a warm, inviting, and kind partner to our families as PTA president, always thinking about how our PTA can reach out to families whose daily work with their children make it difficult to volunteer. She is a generous and thoughtful advocate for all, while at the same time parenting her own child with special needs. She's been instrumental in maintaining and operating the Park School PTA as an opportunity for communication and involvement, improving programs at Park, including after-school and summer camp offerings, working with District 65 administration in the selection of a new principal for Park School, and proving her leadership in the fundraising of nearly $150,000 in little over a year for the renovation of the Park School playground. To quote Anna herself, "A playground is an astonishingly powerful place, a special place where children can feel both safe and free." Her nominators add, in this phrase, Anna transformed her deep hope for her son into a vision for all children, and especially our children who face physical barriers to enjoying the world of play. To quote her nominators further, "Misfortune happens. This is part of human experience. What is remarkable is what we do with it. Anna embodies the spirit of volunteerism because she has made meaning from what is challenging and committed her all to doing what is difficult simply because it is worth the fight." The selection committee agrees. We are very proud to present the 2018 Phyllis Ganser Award to Anna Gilliman. On the plaque, which is displayed in the glass case outside in the lobby here. And if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, I just really feel all the work that we've done has been so collaborative. You know, I think the whole fundraising group deserves this award. And I think that for me, working on this it's been enormously rewarding to see how many people have joined in the collaboration, have recognized Park School as part of the school district, as the children who go there as part of all of the school kids, and really kind of just shown so much generosity, and it's been enormously rewarding for me to meet all of these people and to come across that. So I just want to thank you very much.
Okay, next we will move on to public comments. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the board during open public meetings. The Board of Education will not permit the voicing of personal attacks against any district employee. Please remember to state your name and that you have 3 minutes to address the board. And the first person signed up is Alice Berry.
Good evening. I'm Alice Barry. I'm on the board of Opal. Tonight I want to express my gratitude to Board President Suni Kartha and Vice President Anya Tanyavudi for a year of inspiring leadership. Suni, I'm thankful for your clarity of vision and your passion for fairness and inclusion that has brought together all voices at the table, even when they are in disagreement. 2 weeks ago, you invited a student to speak in this room, although I think she hadn't put her name on the sign-in sheet. And I thought it was emblematic of your approach to welcome stakeholder voices, especially those of the students and graduates of this district. I've heard from teachers that you and Anya both seek information about their experiences, which I think is so important. Teachers see so much. I want to thank Anya for being a thought leader who speaks so eloquently on racial equity. Profound words move me and change me, and it was the words of thought leaders that started my waking up about race 3 years ago. I thank her also for her advocacy for the daily practice of honoring each other's full humanity and for listening to the lived experiences of those whose experience is different from our own. Suni and Anya are personal role models for me, and I'm sure also for many women and girls throughout the district and the community. I think women and girls of color in Evanston haven't had enough chances to see women of color in prominent positions. I would love to see women of color occupy more leadership positions in District 65. I suspect that many of your accomplishments as board officers were behind the scenes, in private discussions and in confidential matters. I've witnessed your leadership as instrumental in the creation of important new job positions for racial equity that I and others in Opal hope will help raise up the achievement of Black students. Your leadership was also key to the detracking of 8th grade algebra, which halted a misguided policy that was harming the esteem and achievement of Black students. Thank you both for your regular reminders that despite all the terminology, what we are really talking about is simple fairness and humanity. Thank you for all you've done to help marginalized people in the district get fair treatment and be seen as wholly human. I look forward to your new initiatives in the coming year. I know that you will also do the challenging work of holding people to high standards. In my opinion, that's another way to be fair to people, to give them opportunities to rise to be their best. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Morgan.
Good evening. My name's Alex Morgan. I live in Evanston. Here tonight to speak in support of Suni Kartha and Anya Tanyavudi's nominations for board president and vice president. On the board, it's been encouraging to see two leaders dedicate themselves to not just talking about equity, reading statements, but actually putting an equity lens on board discussions and thinking about all students when making decisions. In addition to their week-to-week obligations to the board itself, I've seen Suni and Anya dedicate themselves to increased community engagement, responding quickly to questions from community members, attending various community meetings, and hosting community cafes for district stakeholders. While the past year has been refreshing in many ways, it's remained frustrating in others. For example, last October, our Organization for Positive Action and Leadership, Opal board and others stood outside this building and made several specific asks regarding JEH and other issues that included increasing ISIL scores and getting regular progress reports from the district regarding that and other programs. The response we received from these concerns, I don't think it was really a response. It was yet another task force. And I believe you've got a report in front of you tonight that sets big goals, some of which we laid out in that press conference back in October, but tells us very little about how we actually concretely need to move forward. It seems every week, every month, every year we talk more than we do in terms of taking action. And while I've got great faith in this board's leadership, I have a lot less faith in this administration. And if there's one ask that I have for this board and its leadership in the new year, it's that you begin to hold this administration accountable for its outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. we will move on to our next item, the school board officer elections. Sergio?
I move that the Board of Education appoint Paul Gorin as President Pro Tem and Adila Qureshi as Secretary Pro Tem.
Second.
Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes.
Let me, as President Pro Tem, state that Ms. Cartha has submitted a letter of interest in serving as the President of the District 65 School Board. Are there any other nominations, including self-nominations, for this position? Since there are none, we will now take a vote to elect Ms. Cartha Board President for the duration of 1 year.
Cohen,
Cartha?
Mendoza,
Cartha?
Halpern,
Cartha.
Hernandez,
Cartha.
Chow,
Cartha.
Cartha,
Cartha.
And now, Ms. Tanya Vuti has submitted a letter of interest in serving as the Vice President of District 65 School Board. Are there any other nominations, including self-nominations, for this position? Seeing that there are none, we will now take a vote to elect Ms. Tanya Vuti as Vice President for the duration of 1 year.
Cohen,
I can just say yes, right? Okay, yes. Her last name is harder.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Tanya Vuti.
Hernandez,
Yes to Tanya Vuti.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes. Rebecca?
So it's with gratitude and appreciation for all the work that she already does, that I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendation and elect Adila Qureshi as Secretary for the Evanston-Skokie School District 65 Board of Education until its next reorganization meeting in 2019.
Second.
thank you. Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes, yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you. I am privileged to have to serve another year as board president, and I know if Anya could be here, she would say the same. She recently had a baby, so that is why she couldn't join us today. So we move on to the next agenda item?
I move that the Board of Education approve the proposed personnel leave and appointment.
Second.
Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. And then, yes, please.
So with that, accepting of that motion and the positive vote, we have, as a board, taken our recommendation for the next principal of Lincolnwood School, and it's a real pleasure to announce the appointment of Max Weinberg as the next principal. For the last 3 years, Mr. Weinberg has been the head of the lower school at the Catherine Cook School in Chicago. Before joining Catherine Cook, Max served as assistant principal in Chicago Public Schools and the Winnetka Public Schools. He has supported elementary teachers as an induction teaching coach at the University of Chicago's Urban Teacher Education Program after teaching third grade at Chicago's Francis Parker School. He began his career teaching in the South Bronx and in Harlem, and he served as a university-level math education instructor, a literacy consultant, and has worked with community-based organizations on the development of educational programming. And most important, he and his family live right here in Evanston. And so we're just so pleased. Let me, and Max, I don't know if you want to say a word or two. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, I'm a proud District 65 parent. I have a child at Washington and a child at Nichols. And I've been honored to be a community member, especially given all of the equity work that's going on, to echo the Opal president, and I'm very, very, very excited and committed to the work that's going on in the schools, and excited to meet the Lincolnwood folks and teachers and get to know them. And I'm getting to spend some time with Michelle Bourdonnais-Thomas, and so thankful for her leadership for the past year, and looking forward to soaking up as much as I can from her too. So thank you so much. And I would love to just acknowledge Mr. G one more time. I know he is the brain trust of the school, so I'm very, very, very looking forward to getting to know him. So thank you so much.
So. Thank you, Max. We're just so pleased to have you here. And I want to also recognize the outstanding work and leadership of Michelle Bourdonnais-Thomas for her excellent service throughout the whole year. She is one of our outstanding educators, and I've known Michelle since my children were at Oakton School many, many years ago. My daughter is graduating college this weekend, so it's been a wonderful journey, and it will continue to be a wonderful journey in your service here at District 65. So thank you so much for serving the role that you have.
Okay. We went to magnet school enrollment policy. Read the motion, and then we'll have the discussion.
All right, I move that the Board of Education approve the magnet school policy as presented.
Do we need a second?
Second.
Just a second. Then we will move on to discussion. And Peter, would you like to?
Would it be helpful to sort of review what I did last time for the board?
I think that would, yes, please.
Okay. So as background, we began work at Paul's direction in looking at our magnet school policy, magnet school and program policy. The primary reason for opening up this policy for review had to do with the expansion of the two-way immersion or TWE program at Bessie Rhodes School, which is planned for the 2018-19 school year, as you know. At the time the board approved the expansion of that program, the administration indicated that we would need to revise this policy to ensure that siblings of current students at the school had preference for enrollment at the school. And so in the proposal that you have before you tonight, one of the three things that we're recommending is to basically make it so that incoming students who have an older sibling at the school would be the first students to be selected into the program above any other applicant for the program, including siblings of students who are in other TWE programs. And the policy as it had been written would not have allowed us to select Bessie Rhodes siblings above other TWE siblings, and so the modification that we're recommending tonight will allow that, which is what makes the most sense and what was promised to the board at the time that we expanded the program. As we got into this work, we also looked at some issues that were coming up frequently in our selection process that we thought as long as we were making a recommendation to the board, it would be worth the board's consideration. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail about what those two other proposed changes are. One of the two is also fairly simple. The language that we're suggesting be added to the policy is that the superintendent may also establish criteria for selection into magnet programs in grades 1 through 5 for students transferring into District 65. The administrative procedure we have in mind to go behind this language is basically allowing us to accept students who are entering District 65 after kindergarten who already have experience in a two-way immersion program in Spanish in another school district. Essentially, after kindergarten, there are a small number, but some students who enter the program as English dominant students who then decide to return to a monolingual setting or to apply to another magnet school or program. And so that leaves us some seats in our older grades where we could accommodate additional students. And so we've had, over time, a handful of students who come to the district with this two-way immersion experience, but no way for us to admit them to the program, even though doing so would be at no additional cost to the district, would in some cases provide us some additional opportunity to manage our enrollment across schools, and would be of benefit to this student in maintaining their bilingualism. And so that's the reason for the third bullet point on that first page in terms of the recommendations. The last thing that we looked at was, in the policy as it was written, there are two preference areas. These are approximately equivalent to the 5th Ward geographically. And the best I could tell from the records in my department is that the last time these were revisited was in the mid-90s, having to do with the original opening of the Bessie Rhodes Magnet School. At that time, the boundaries, which are included in the memo, were laid out, and basically the area was cut in half at Church Street. So the area between Church and Dempster became a preference area for the King Arts Magnet School, and the area north of Church as far as McCormick became the preference area for the Bessie Rhodes Magnet School. What the current policy provides is that 20% of the students and 20% of the population at Bessie Rhodes will be made up of students from the Bessie Rhodes preference area, so long as A, we get enough applications from that preference area to admit 20% of a class, and so long as it doesn't get in the way of our ability to manage enrollment in other schools. So if we had huge over-enrollment in other areas, the policy provides some ability to reduce the percenter who are coming from the attendance area, but we would need a very urgent reason to do so. The same applies to the King Arts preference area, where 20% of the incoming class at King Arts is selected among students who live in the preference area. So in order to analyze whether this continues to make sense, we looked at a couple of things. Primarily, we were looking at how many students live within these attendance areas, and then what are the current selections from these attendance areas into the schools for which they have a preference. What we found is that about one classroom worth of students per grade level live within the King Arts preference area, and about 3 classrooms worth of students per grade level live within the Bessie Rhodes attendance area. So basically, in any given year, we have somewhere between 18 and 25 students per grade level who are living within the King Arts preference area, and we have somewhere between 60 and 80 students per grade level living within the Bessie Rhodes attendance area. And on the last page of the memo, you can see the racial demographics of those students. Both preference areas are very similar in that they consist of more than 95% students of color, with about half of the students in the attendance area being Black or African American, and another, I think, 30 to 35% who identify as Hispanic or Latinx. So then we looked, now that we knew who was there and what their racial demographics were, at what were the applications that were currently coming from those areas. And so we looked at the most recent year of data. What we found in the last round of magnet selection, so this was for the most recent kindergarten class up for the 2017-18 school year, was that 24% of kindergartners selected for Bessie Rhodes resided in the Rhodes preference area. So based on applications from other attendance areas, we were actually able to exceed the 20% requirement, and about a quarter of the incoming kindergartners last year at Bessie Rhodes came from the preference area. That represented about 11% of kindergarten age students who lived within Bessie Rhodes preference area, and 75% of applications from that preference area were selected. We did the exact same analysis for the King Arts preference area. There, 16% of kindergartners selected at King Arts reside within the school's preference area. 41% of kindergarten age students living within that preference area ended up going to King Arts, and 93% of applications from the preference area were selected. So by selected, what I mean is that we offered a seat and the family accepted it. So we didn't select 100% of the applications from the King Arts area, likely because a parent ended up selecting a different option. So we're not able currently to make up 20% of the seats at King Arts from families who live within the King Arts preference area, largely because we have 4 classrooms at King Arts at each grade level, and only 1 classroom worth of students per grade level who live within the preference area. So we could basically accommodate everybody within the preference area and still not hit the 20% depending on how many total students we enroll. So with that analysis in mind, what we are recommending tonight is that the 2 preference areas would be combined into a single preference area. So the same geography would be treated as a preference area, but families who live within that preference area, starting with the current round of selections, which is about to start, would have an equal chance of being selected either to Bessie Rhodes or to King Arts. And the analysis that we did suggests to us that it is very unlikely that it would change a family's odds of getting into either school. Rather, what it would do is increase the chance that a family would be able to have one or the other option. And we think this makes sense to do now because the programming at the two magnet schools, which used to be fairly similar, is now quite different, with one offering a two-way immersion program and the other offering a monolingual setting with some additional arts programming compared to our neighborhood schools. So I will leave that there. There's an equity analysis related to our recommendations, which in summary has some rather positive implications in terms of racial equity, particularly racial equity in terms of selection into the TWE program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have.
Can I add?
Yeah.
We talked at our committee meeting.
Correct.
When Peter shared this initially about the lack of preference for making significant changes like this so late in the game.
Correct.
But the rationale, the 3 points that were shared didn't change or wouldn't change people's outcome this time around and would actually give greater flexibility for those older kids that are moving in, but also more opportunities to make that single preference area for the district to accept more kids.
Correct.
And that was a part of the discussion. And I think if any of the recommendations would impact the outcome of selection, I'm not sure that we'd be having this conversation right now, but because it's so late in the year.
So late in the year, we didn't have an opportunity to get input from the affected families. So I think that was originally the inclination was not to accept it, but hearing that the outcomes wouldn't actually change and would actually give families in that area more choice rather than less. But that being said, I think there are still some questions, so you want to start?
Yeah, because I just want to push a little bit on that confidence that the outcomes won't change. And here's what I'm concerned about. So with respect to the King Arts preference area, we're now under the 20% because there's, as you said, there's 3 times as many children in the Bessie Rhodes preference area, which is the 5th ward, versus the 2nd ward, which is the King Arts preference area. My concern is, net, given the side, if you're adding 3 times the potential children to when you expand this pool, to me, just common sense tells me that there's going to be a lower likelihood that would take you over the 20%, and there's going to be a lower likelihood then that children and families in the current King Arts preference area will get that placement, because it would, assuming some number of of that 3 times the children actually apply to King Arts. I don't know how it could not change the outcome. Now, you could tell us now how many applications we have, right, for King Arts from the 5th ward, and whether or not that's the case. But to me, just from a general kind of logical standpoint, we're dealing with a small area that does have probably less kids, it does have less children, and they're making up 14 or whatever the percent. And then you're going to add to it potentially, a catchment area that's triple that size, and you're not going to exceed 6%. It seems like you would exceed the 20%, and then if you do exceed the 20%, by default, those folks in the original catchment area are going to have less likelihood, And it's hard for me to even explain this, how it's going on in my head, but it just seems to me that, and the original premise for the King Arts, different than Bessie Rhodes, for the King Arts preference area was that those children who could walk and that currently don't have a walkable school would have preference to King Arts. And I'm concerned that this is going to dilute that preference. That's my concern, and then especially given folks applied with one set of rules or criteria, and now we're changing that. So even if there were one child who would have made it in from Bessie Rhodes, or vice versa, even from King Arts or Bessie Rhodes, it's concerning to me, that particular predicament. And I'm having a hard time processing how it couldn't be an issue.
So this is what I shared with the policy committee last week. Just basic statistics back up what you're saying in that if we increase the preference area, there's no special preference for the students in the King Arts preference area compared to the Bessie Rhodes. And I don't have the count of how many Bessie Rhodes preference area applications for King Arts we currently have. But yes, this increases for people who are living in the King Arts preference area their chance of being selected to Bessie Rhodes, and could increase to Bessie Rhodes and could decrease their likelihood of being accepted at King Arts. The reason that I think this is very unlikely to have that effect is that we currently have fairly small class sizes at King Arts. And so currently, as you mentioned, 16% of kindergartners selected at King Arts resided within the school's preference area, but that's 16% of classrooms that are not full. And so there is plenty of room for us to expand the size of the classrooms at King Arts. And so therefore, my prediction, I can't make a guarantee, is that anyone who lived in the King Arts preference area who will apply would have likely been accepted before and also will equally or very closely equally likely be accepted because we have flex capacity at King Arts at the current time.
So we would just increase the class size.
Correct.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just wondering if we might consider a way that for this transition year, that we could say that would happen? Not but that we would give like preference within a preference.
Well, no, I was actually going to say, is there a way that we can word the policy so for example, the current King Arts preference area still remains like higher priority for King Arts, and then to the extent that that 20% isn't filled, it'll be filled from the Bessie Rhodes preference area? And vice versa?
If that's the board's preference, it's certainly something we could consider. In order to implement it for next year, we would need to have an amendment from one of you tonight to modify the language.
Correct.
So we would either need to approve or deny what's before you tonight, or take a moment in our proceedings to come up with some amendatory language.
And then we could potentially look at that again next year to remove that earlier in the process so that those who are applying understand what they're applying for and what their criteria. I mean, before the May meeting, I would strongly suggest we, look at it again before the May policy meeting, but earlier in the year, if we wanted to remove that preference within a preference.
So I think just working off the cuff here, if we go to the original language, 20% of new admissions for Dr. Bessie Rhodes Magnet School will be allocated to the students who apply to that school and reside in the Kingsley, Lincolnwood, and Willard school attendance areas south and east of McCormick Boulevard and north of Church Street. And I think we can define that as Bessie Rhodes Bessie Rhodes preference area, so long as the racial balance and relief of overcrowding goals are not violated, period. And then to the extent that 20% of new admissions cannot be filled from this preference area, from the Bessie Rhodes preference area, they will be filled by the King Arts preference area as defined below, and then do the same thing. Define the King, in the 20% of new admissions for King Lab School be allocated to students, define that as King Lab, and then put the same reciprocal language. Do I need to say that again?
I was going to recommend the third bullet expand to say the superintendent may establish criteria for selection of the magnet programs in grades K through 5 instead of 1 through 5.
Well, I think, no, it is supposed to be 1 through 5, because K is already, it's for older students.
If you expand it to K, then
right?
they can address this on case-by-case basis for the incoming case as it comes up.
But I think everyone is applying as newly as K.
So are you suggesting that we would leave the preference area language alone and then handle this as an administrative procedure in terms of giving King Arts preference to?
Are we talking about amending the policy for this 1 year to see how it plays out and then revisiting it in the fall?
Well, I would think you'd take the preference within a preference out for next, to make, see how it works and how many, if there was the case where someone who, a family in King Arts didn't get in.
Right,
And
and I
then
was just
look at it
suggesting
again.
that we give administrative procedure
Give us
rights
the flexibility.
to catch those as they come through for this spring, and then revisit in the fall and make the policy fit the action.
And to just,
Yeah, not change it, not include the first bullet point at all, just leave it the way it is currently.
Or
and
leave
let-
the bullet, but give the right to amend it should it be in conflict with a preference.
let me back up to just check for understanding about the rationale for the change. Is your concern about making the change at this time in the calendar or making the change at all?
My concern is both. I mean, both, but particularly this, doing it this time and making the change, because there's been no opportunity for input from families, and quite frankly, they probably don't even know that this is happening. And it's going to impact, I'm very concerned, let's put myself in the situation of someone who just applied, and my child doesn't get in, and I live in the current King Arts catchment area. I would be very upset, I guess, if we passed this policy and I had a certain understanding of how this was going to work, and then I didn't. So it's a combination for me personally, and I am, not personally, but it's a combination for me. I think if we tried it and had the preference within a preference, we could see whether your prediction holds true, and then have some data that going into next year, we could look at that policy and change it for good.
I'm sorry, I may have missed some of the conversation when I was trying to write this out, but if we just leave a preference within a preference, and that's just the new policy going forward, is there still the same concern? I don't even know why we would have to revisit it, because the King Arts preference area would still be the King Arts preference area. It would just be, if that 20% isn't filled, we'll go to the Bessie Rhodes preference area.
Yeah, I mean,
So some
I'm
of the
fine with
equity
that. I thought maybe
concerns-
there was another reason to.
No, I don't.
And that's part of why, at the committee meeting, we were talking about being okay with this change, because it wouldn't impact people who have already applied,
Right.
and the preferences that they've
Correct.
put
So
on the
if-
sheet. It wouldn't
Right.
take anything away from them.
So if
But
we
that
have,
only-
But I
that's
think
only
this is a way
If it's a preference within a preference, I think it would impact, it could impact folks.
And Peter did say that there was a theoretical possibility that if there were this like influx of
But the data
applications.
suggests that there's been an
Right. So the data suggests that this wouldn't be a concern. However, there is a theoretical concern. So I think the way to address that theoretical concern is to create a preference within a preference. And I think that if at some point we want to, for some reason, eliminate that, then we can start that process earlier and have the discussion. But if we don't, I think this language gets us to the same place to be able to fill those spots and give greater choice to the students within the overall preference area, but still not shortchange, even theoretically, students who are in the current King Arts preference area.
and then we can look at the data after registration and see where we landed, and see if Peter and our prediction is actually true.
But I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't even matter if this just becomes a policy going forward.
Right, but if it isn't, if for whatever reason we exceed the King Arts, person who has preference in the King Arts area doesn't get in.
No, but this language would say that they would, because they would have first preference.
Fine.
And only if everybody within the King Arts preference area was in, and there was still room.
Yep.
Then, that's what I mean by the language. Does everyone else understand what I
Yes.
wrote to be that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Do you want to?
I think that how much you fill the
So-
classroom is somewhat of a different question.
I'm sorry, say that again?
How big the classes are is a different question, because you can
tweet
take.
classrooms by definition are 10% less the average of the district.
Correct.
So they're always going to be
Grade level at school.
Grade level at school. So there would be a difference in the class size of a tweet classroom depending on which school it was at.
So if it's a all tweets, okay.
But in King Arts, where there aren't tweet classes, is there a separate reason why, if you have capacity?
We use our class size guidelines as the maximum
Right.
that we would accept at a magnet school. And we try to land somewhere near the district average sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the class sizes at other schools. So if I'm understanding correctly, one way of modifying this might be to leave the original 2 paragraphs that begin with 20%, and at the end of each of those paragraphs, you could add a sentence that would say, for example, on the first paragraph that relates to Bessie Rhodes, it could say students within these geographic boundaries would also have priority admission to the King Art School if 20% of that school's enrollment is not already filled with students described in the paragraph who live in the geographic area described in the paragraph below.
Right.
And then
That
just
was the
vice
same
versa
thing.
on the other
Yes.
paragraph.
Yeah, sorry. Can I also just quickly question the 20%? And that it seems like from the data that you presented, Peter, that there's some unmet demand for Bessie Rhodes in the Bessie Rhodes preference area, like a rather significant number, if only 75% of the applications went through. And now that the school is moving to a TWE school, I'd suspect that there's going to be some significant change in that figure. And I'm just wondering if in order to make more room at King Arts, that we increase the 20% to 25% for the preference area, since we're having the preference within a preference as well. And that's both of those numbers are relatively arbitrary to me anyway, but I'm just wondering if it makes sense to increase capacity for students looking to have a monolingual magnet experience.
I would be less comfortable making a change like that just because I agree with you that maybe the 20%, I don't know the history of the 20%.
Yeah.
How that was created, so I don't know how arbitrary it is, but certainly increasing it to any number would feel arbitrary, so I would be less comfortable with approving a change like that.
The couple of things I'm thinking through are, the magnet schools offer us 2 options, or they serve a couple of purposes. One is that they provide additional choice for students who live in the geographic area near here who do not have direct access to a neighborhood school. And the other is they allow us to relieve overcrowding and try to do a better job of equalizing class sizes across all of our other elementary schools. And so, like, if you were to say, because it's all arbitrary, right, 20%, if you were to say 50%, then I would start to think, oh, I'm not sure that I can accommodate 50% and also equalize class sizes across all those other schools. So I guess I hadn't done any analysis to see like what would be the effect of 20 versus 25. And absent that analysis, it makes me a little worried to do it at this time.
That would be nice to look at
After
in
this year.
planning after
Right.
this year.
I think that's right.
If we were to have done it, what would it have looked like? And
I think that's right.
seen some of the consequences of it. I really like the language for siblings at Bessie Rhodes, because I know that was an
Right.
explicit part of what families were told would happen during the change. I think that's important for keeping families together. I love that. The other parts, I think are good shifts for how the process works.
And we're okay with the language on the superintendent offering the establishing criteria? Okay, so can you read the motion again, but just changing it to as amended?
Do you have it written down somewhere?
Just say
You
as
can just say
amended.
as amended.
I move that the Board of Education approve the magnet school policy as amended.
Second?
Second.
Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes. Then Candace, you've got the motion on policy updates?
I do? Okay, hold on. Oh, sorry. Oh, I move that the Board of Education approve the policy amendments as listed in the board memo.
Second.
Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Now we will move on to our discussion items. First one is the school calendar review. Beatrice?
So for your first review tonight is a copy of the 2019-2020 draft school calendar. We've stayed pretty much in line with the way we've devised the calendar, and we've been working collaboratively with the high school to make sure that our calendars are as aligned as possible, but there are two changes that I think are important for you to note for the 2019-2020 school year. We would have a different both student and teacher start date. ETHS, they're going to have their teachers return on August 19th, and their students are going to be returning on Wednesday, August 21st. We have our teachers returning on August 22nd, and our students returning on Monday, August 26th. We have our winter recess, our spring recess, as well as some other holidays are aligned. The other difference would be that at the end of the school year, the students at ETHS, their last day would be May 29th, and our students will be ending on June 2nd. So for the majority of the calendar, it is aligned. With regards to ETHS, I think they have some very specific needs, and changing their student start date does allow them to have final exams prior to winter recess, which is something that they've been advocating for as a community. And so this would be the first, that would be the first year where we would see our start and end dates start to fluctuate from ETHS.
And by contractual agreement with our teachers union, if we wanted to start before August 20th,
there is language that we would have to bargain the impact of what that would look like, correct?
So it's a bargainable conversation.
Questions?
I'll go.
Please.
It seems like, I mean, having been in these discussions, we've kind of known for a while that this was ultimately going to happen on the part of 202, because they've been working towards it, and now having a high school student, I understand the value of having finals before winter break. I have a procedural question, which is, has the 202 board already approved their calendar?
No, so it's going to their board, I believe, during the joint committee meeting on the 21st. I don't know if they're the same where they have one look and then they vote, but so in terms of our process, we always bring it to you for discussion first and then you vote on it. So they should be approving the same evening that we're asking you to approve, which would be on May 21st.
So in the past, our concerns around not having alignment on start and finish were just A, not having alignment, and B, I think some concerns around families and older children taking care of younger children those few days and what impact that would have. I know you mentioned that the joint calendar committee hadn't met this year, or didn't?
Correct. No, we did not. I worked with Dr. Keith Robinson, so we discussed calendars, but we did not have a joint meeting. In terms of District 65, we really weren't proposing any significant changes, so our conversation was more about some of the changes that they were looking at, but we did not meet. If it's the direction of the board where we think we want to perhaps either follow suit or do something more significant moving forward, then we would reconvene a committee again.
I guess one question I would just ask is maybe we could bring back some of you refer to the 2015 survey, and I don't remember, but it would be good we asked for priorities of families then in terms of alignment, and what was the feedback on start date, end date alignment that we could discuss in our joint board meeting with the joint board before we make because we're not voting tonight anyway, make a final decision. Not that we do something new, but that at least we're cognizant of those issues and how that particular, I know it ranked lower than alignment of the major holidays, which makes sense.
Right.
Where was it, and what was the magnitude of the feedback and
I don't remember the order of preference, but I do remember there was a fairly small overlap of families that have children in both districts.
And I actually think for some of the preference, it was for some of our families as well as teachers preferring the later start date in August as well.
Correct. That was my other recollection.
Yes.
But generally speaking, there was even a push for after
It was later in the, right.
To move the start date. I do think, obviously it's hugely significant that all the other major holidays during the year align. I think that's incredibly important. I think the real concern is not so much the end with high school students getting out before, but the start of the year with, if there are older siblings who are caring for younger siblings, then having them start sooner than we start would be the concern. Before we open it up for a huge, a big discussion, I would want to, I don't know if there's even any way to assess, like, what is the actual families that are impacted by this. I don't know if there's any way that we can know that. So our options are, I don't even know if it's currently an option to try to negotiate an earlier start date with teachers, but the other option would be to try to figure out if there's anything that we can offer, or through the city partnerships that we can offer for those 3 days for families who might need that childcare because of the unalignment. If there's anything that we can do with partnerships or through ourselves, like to provide some childcare opportunities, maybe that might be the easier route than trying to push for a difference in, or trying to push for that alignment and start date.
My only comment on this calendar, because I think you guys got to pick the dates that make the most sense for the organization, is August. At that time, teachers are prepping their classrooms. Like, you don't want our buildings used for the child care plans or whatever the
Right, no.
But I think a calendar that's approved this far in advance gives our park district partners and city partners plenty of time to plan those witching hour of summer weeks when there aren't any camps and there's no anything going on, and try to put together programs and options for the pre-K through 8 community that might work. And I think that's doable.
Because this is Teacher Appreciation Week, if I can, I know if our colleagues from DEC, the District Educators Council, were here, they would argue, and I understand it, that the not going to school before August 20th is also about the dog days of August, about the heat, the potential heat that is part of our environment in the Chicagoland area, and we don't have air-conditioned buildings, and so that's always been the appropriate pushback on trying to, when we've said, well, let's go a little earlier, that's been the critique that we've received.
Just want to mention too that in previous joint city city and school district meetings, there's been some accommodations made during our half days, right? So I know Ridgeville has partnered with the school district and the public library and our institutional partners to offer programs. I mean, particularly in South Evanston right now, but again, it's something that we already have a model to build off of.
So I think we can
and
work
again,
with
they offer these these options for free. So. I mean, we have a precedent now in regards to, again, leveraging those relationships with the institutions that we work with.
So just so I can clarify for myself, is there something different you'd like for May 21st in order to make a decision regarding this calendar, which you would still be approving as a draft? It's not final at that point.
You've got the major holidays and the major breaks.
Oh, because this is 1920.
Right, this is the 1920 school year.
Not next year. I think it's okay as is. I think we just work on partnerships to try to accommodate those days. Does that sound right? Does anybody have a different?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back and look. If you have the survey results handy that you could just share again, that would be helpful. If not, I'll go search it up.
You can share.
Anybody
Just
else?
to be clear, I want to make sure we communicate to our community partners about that time beforehand.
Correct,
I think
yes.
We're asking anybody here to set up camp.
Thank you.
Please don't.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so is anything else on that, or can we move on? Okay, then if we can move on to our next discussion item on the early childhood report.
And let me start off. Thank you very much on this. Adila, you're going to turn on the machine? Okay. So we're pleased to bring forward a report about our early childhood programs as promised to the board. And, you know, really a couple key points as we jump into the presentation. Our early childhood programs and programming here at JEH, which is a multitude of programs, I think, as you learn through the report, we've set as a priority of the administration, a priority of the board, and a priority of the community. Our colleagues at Opal, our colleagues at Evanston Cradle to Career are very engaged around how do we improve the early childhood offerings that we have. And so we wanted to do what we could in a strategic and a focused manner to really take a deep dive into what the programs are here, what sort of data that we have, and how do we actually set appropriate directions for the future of programming here at JEH, and how do we set directions for our programming here that can continue to learn from the other early childhood providers in and around Evanston. We make this, we present this as we are also in a transition of leadership in the early childhood programming, and it's an opportune time to actually take advantage of the report, the information, the recommendations that we bring to you to be able to leverage that as we engage and bring on a new leader of our programming here at JEH. We did convene a task force, and the task force, and Joyce will tell you a little bit more about the players who came to offer us a wide range of expertise and perspectives on early childhood programming, whether it's from a community perspective, from a parent's perspective, from an expert's perspective in the early childhood community. And we asked the task force to look at the wide range of data that we've presented here and offer their best thinking of ways that we should be thinking about moving forward. These are not the task force recommendations. These are the recommendations of the administration moving forward on how we work in a systematic way to align the work of our JEH Center with the rest of the system, and how we align the work of our JEH system and even continue to align with the other providers within town. So we present the report with our next steps, and we look forward to hearing your comments and questions and recommendations as well as we enter into this next chapter of early childhood programming here in District 65, which again will include new leadership down here. Joyce, Parts.
Okay. Thank you. So, as you can see, as you go through the report, there are a lot of appendices to this report that includes information that we have taken liberally from Mr. Godard, who had done a number of the analyses as well as the community needs assessment. Those were parts of the report that were really helpful in terms of us looking at that, as well as different research that we looked at, minutes from the task force, as well as from the focus groups, and there's a number of pieces of information that staff for the early childhood program prepared for us. So I really want to thank them for all that information that they shared. So the root of our work is really to improve our early childhood program, and this lies with our commitment to equity, as stated in our equity policy, and our commitment to eliminate achievement and opportunity gaps. We have already focused some of our equity work with our staff in our early childhood center, and a number of them have already taken part in Beyond Diversity, are in seed groups, and we have one group that is this summer working on a project in terms of developing some culturally relevant curriculum that applies to early childhood teachers from our Head Start program. So this is efforts that we are working on, but really is rooted in our equity statement. So as you can see in this slide, we're a big program. This is our current
about our current enrollment. I think we have a few more children right now. We have 4 programs with a total of 474 students. These programs serve students who bring many personal assets and reflect a wide range of diversity. Roughly 75% of the children in the programs are identified as either Black or Latinx. We are by far the largest early childhood education provider in the District 65 attendance area. The goal of all of these programs is to create opportunities that increase kindergarten readiness amongst participating children. So as we look at our achievement data and data from other sources, it's clear that we need a two-pronged approach to maintain and expand our efforts in grades K through 8 to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps we experience in District 65, but also to strengthen our work with children and family prior to those children's enrollment in kindergarten. Improving our early childhood experiences needs to be embedded within and connected to our broader efforts to address the opportunity and achievement gaps. To help us develop and clarify our plans for improving our pre-K programs, we enlisted the volunteer help of experts and key community stakeholders to form the District 65 Early Childhood Task Force. We asked the task force to do a general review of our current efforts and to suggest some paths we should consider as we develop our early childhood improvement plans. So as you can see, this is the task force members that we had. Included a mix of experts in early learning, other education experts, community leaders, including 2 board members, and district personnel. So our goal is to create the highest quality, state-of-the-art early childhood programs for our children and families, especially for Black and Latinx families who are most in need of those experiences. Our goal is within 5 years to cut in half the number of students who are not kindergarten ready upon enrollment in kindergarten. As we look at trends and data and develop more sophisticated measures, we may tweak that goal, but our intent and target will always be to make a huge dent in the number of students who are not kindergarten ready. And ultimately, we want all of our students to be kindergarten ready. So, Mr. Godard has suggested a framework for developing precise measures of our progress, which we think will help us stay on track towards achieving our goals. This is taking a look at ISIL and TS Gold and looking at what are the benefits and drawbacks of those. We can talk about that in a bit. So the work that went into developing this report took part over a better part of this year. In addition to the meetings of the task force, District 65 did a lot of work pulling together data and other information, conducting internal reviews of the program, and seeking input from key stakeholders. This included 5 focus groups. 3 of those focus groups were parent focus groups held at different times, with a total of 20 parents that took part in those. We had 1 staff focus group that 30 staff members participated in, and a community task force, and we had 8 community members that joined that. All of the information was shared with the task force, who provided lots of input that went into an initial draft of the report. The task force then provided extensive feedback on the initial draft that guided our revisions to create this final report that we have shared. This was a major effort to examine our current programs and set a course for improvements. We talk about this as an effort as gathering the information to move our programs from good to great. Oops. Next. So based upon the data collected and input from the task force, we initially developed 14 recommendations in the first draft of the report. After getting feedback and suggestions from the task force and reconsidering the initial draft, we did a major revision of the report, including condensing the recommendations into the 7 recommendations listed in this slide. Here they are, and the remainder of my presentation, I'm going to talk about those. So our first recommendation is related to the fact that among our findings, we found that we needed an improved vision for what our early childhood program should be and a plan for getting us there. The plan should be visionary, but also detailed. It should address everything related to the programs from soup to nuts and identify a pathway for establishing our early childhood programs as model programs with a clear focus on creating programs that improve outcomes for Black and Latinx students. Our current 4 programs were defined largely by the requirements of different funding sources. Creating a single program, one that incorporates the requirements of diverse funding sources, will help eliminate confusion about the different programs and create a coherent program of the highest quality for all our students, and to help develop a cohesive early childhood community among our families. A recurring theme in our findings and discussions is that our early childhood programs now seem to stand apart from our other district programs and initiatives, operating more or less independently. Staff members in particular felt that early childhood programs need to be a higher priority for the district. We need to address that going forward so that we can develop seamless pre-K through 8 trajectories, improve connections between our early childhood and K-8 programs, and create better structures for transitioning children from the JEH programs into kindergarten. And we need to do a better job of incorporating early childhood into our communication within the district and with external parties. We see our early childhood programs as an essential component of our equity-driven commitment to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps. That places JEH programs at the heart of our district priorities and requires us to look more with a different lens at the current budgets for JEH programs. Task force members recommended that we make a major effort to actively recruit more Black and Latinx teachers for JEH programs so that there are more teachers that reflect the largely Black and Latinx makeup of the children at JEH. We are already working with Ms. Davis on ways to enhance our staff recruitment efforts along those lines. The Abbotsford-Skokie community has a wealth of agencies and early childhood providers who can contribute to our efforts and from whom we can learn. Similarly, there are many ways we might be able to support their efforts. We have already begun to create an Abbotsford-Skokie early childhood community. We want to double down on those efforts and strengthen our collaboration with our community partners. We also want to develop relationships with the best early childhood providers nationally. Creating a first-rate evaluation plan at the outset of our improvement efforts will help ensure that we evaluate our progress as we go and make changes to our plans as merited. Creating a stronger community of JEH families will help make our programs better, provide more effective support for parents, and pay long-term benefits as those families become active in their children's schools after transition to kindergarten. That's it.
That's it. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to open it up to questions from board members. Anybody want to start?
So what are the next steps? We have a list of points that have been put together by the task force. We have the hiring of a new director. When does the strategy come into place, and what is the timeline for all of these observations?
So I think step number one is to hire the new director and then simultaneously look at some of the recommendations here to figure out over the next year where there are short-term opportunities. So short-term opportunities are working with HR on hiring processes. Short-term opportunities are really looking at the multiple programs, the 4 programs, and thinking about how they mesh together from the perspective of a parent outside. But also those are dynamics that behind the scenes, the funding sources have to be coordinated. And so that's a key piece. I think there's already a learning community of Evanston, Skokie, early childhood providers who learn from each other. And so it's continuing that and ratcheting that up amongst the colleagues here. I'm trying to think what else goes fast here. I think where I'm hesitating, because this is both long-term and short-term and long-term. When I landed here, and even to this day, it felt as though the early childhood programming was separate from the district. And so the opportunity to engage with staff here and with community members to be able to say, we have to proactively push the system to be a pre-K 8 system as opposed to a K-8 system and a pre-K set of programs is loud and clear here in the report. And I think that then engages us to ask a lot of questions and then move forward on issues around curriculum and instruction. Issues around assessment, as is documented in the report, issues around hiring, so that we become a seamless system of pre-K through 8 as opposed to a separate system that's sort of operating next to each other. So that is both a short-term piece with new leadership, and as we move forward as a senior administrative team to think about how we focus, how we double down on the work in the pre-K. But it's also a longer-term piece because that will take some time to do. There's a piece in the presentation and in the report that talks about budgeting and priorities for resources. And I think what we were at least trying to argue in the report is that there's not a substantial amount of new money coming to the district. So if we're going to think about the pre-K program and prioritize the pre-K program in a way that that meets the needs of the district, we're going to have to think about where there are trade-offs financially. So that's another part of the puzzle that we can move forward on. Joyce and other?
Yeah. So next year we're going to have additional full-day Head Start classes. So we'll have, I think, 5 full-day Head Start and 1 half-day. So the program is changing in terms of our interest in really reaching out to families who need more in the way of care. It also gives us more time with kids here when it's a longer day. So there's different, because of our Head Start grant, which I think we're in the 3rd year of it, our programming has morphed quite a bit over time in terms of changes that we've made. This year has been an important year because we really tried to pull together our family center in a better transition with our 3 to 5 year-old programming. So that continues to be one of our big parts that we really want to work on, is that this is one center where we, begin with children at the age of 6 weeks. So I'd say that that's a piece programmatically, and looking at, kind of the both the curriculum, which we would like to change in 0 to 3. We've been using parents as teachers for a long time. We'd like a different kind of program in that. So I'd say those are some of the steps that we're going to be taking.
One of the interesting conversations we had in the task force and then with the colleagues downstairs here is sort of the balance between play and academics in the early grades. And that's a balance that is in the field. Sergio, you know this from the expertise that you brought to the table and the work that you do. There are many programs that are very successful in town that are very, very, very play-based. And that could be great for us, but there's also a clarion call to build skills. And so finding that balance, which we have between play and skill building, is also a short-term and long-term piece for us.
Okay, I just want to stress the urgency of this work. And the task force was put together because the issues were already brought up. We know that this area needs to be worked on. And I just feel that with the presentation, there's an overwhelming amount of information that's much of which we already knew. And I still don't feel like I know what we're going to be working on exactly in the year to come and how we're not going to be in the same place next year.
We're going to hire a new director. We're going to work on the process to align the curriculum from where we are within the center with the rest of our programming. And we're going to move forward on some of the other recommendations that we have. I mean, it's a piece of the enterprise that we need to devote even more time to, and that's where this will help us do.
I would also posit that streamlining the funding, it is cheaper to invest more in the early childhood programming than it is to remediate an academic or behavioral issue once it gets to the K-8 part of the system.
Right.
And finding a way to, there's lots of programs, lots of funding sources to put it together. A director who develops the pride in the building, like all of our other neighborhood schools have, for coming to school and growing. I think it's a good place to put our money where our mouth is into early childhood programming.
But to that, I agree with everything that both of you have said. I think that we do need to, the recommendations are great. I think we just need to now solidify that into an actual plan and strategy on how to move forward. And I think, from a board perspective, we need to understand what is our role in supporting that plan. And it sounds like resource allocation will be one of the primary ways that we do that. And so we need to be able to have those discussions early and I think transparently about what those trade-offs are. And, I think it's right that we want to put our money where our mouths are, but we need to understand how that's going to be accomplished. So, and it seems that that's probably the biggest piece from a board perspective that we need to get involved in.
I think, so one place I think we can start, because we've talked about JEH as a school, is as we, and maybe, when we talk about budget development, as we look forward and using, we look at per pupil expense for our schools, we should be doing the same thing for JEH, understanding that the cost infrastructure is different, but at least right now, we have no knowledge in the half-day versus full-day program, what's the instructional cost per pupil, what's the operational cost per pupil, because at the end of the day, if we're making trade-offs, it's going to move from one place to the other. And I agree, totally agree that, and I've been saying for much time, we have to focus earlier on, but we also have to be cognizant that these students are a quarter of all the students that we then serve at the school district for K-8. So it's a different, it's a different balance, but we need some information to start thinking about how different those things are today and, what's a realistic shift look like, and what does that then result? What's that impact on, there's going to be, if we don't have more dollars, there's going to be an impact. You're moving,
correct.
You're going to be moving from K through 8 per pupil. So that's something that we could start working on in the coming year from a fiduciary fiscal responsibility. And then could we, I guess, to me, obviously, recommendation one is kind of the big kahuna. It's develop a strategic plan, like taking that apart and thinking about phasing and what does a timeline look like for that? Clearly the coherence components, that could be earlier, but there's, I think we've talked a lot about assessment and the robust need across the district to understand what kindergarten readiness is and have that become more robust in this. So what does that piece look like? I actually felt like maybe in the recommendations it seemed that, that this was not new but different, like presented, but there's a huge amount of information and data here that I had never seen, and I don't think now is the right time to ask a bunch of questions, but I can tell you I have a bunch of questions about analysis, some of the analysis data that was very helpful using the teaching strategies gold approach versus what we had, and just, there was an assertion around Black students who, in JEH programming do better than Black students coming into kindergarten from other plans. I'd like to unpack that more at some point and understand what's that based on, and is that the same for Latinx students? Because we kind of group it. We don't want to group it together, but look at it separately. And the data related to teaching strategies has a different picture than what we've seen in other data that we've gotten. So, that's both, I think, interesting because it's obviously different domains and different ways of looking at things, but it is complex. And so maybe there might be an opportunity at another time, or either a part of our ongoing accountability reporting that we look at this kind of data separately. Because I know the primary reason to include the data was that it was used by the task force, so I don't think it's, it's right now for us to go delve into it. But I found it to be illuminating and very interesting to view, so thank you for that.
Candace, there are just a couple thoughts on that, and I think you're right that it probably is beyond the scope of tonight's discussion. But just for context, with the exception of teaching strategies gold, almost everything that the task force looked at was something that has previously been published. It's just been compiled in one particular place. So each year we have published a community needs assessment as part of a board packet. The finding regarding the Black students from the JEH program was part of the Black Student Achievement Report. And so a lot of what is in there, which when you put it together around a different topic, you see the data in new ways. So that's entirely understandable, but most of what's in there is previously been published. The other thought just about teaching strategies gold, because that is data that we haven't published publicly before, I think there are a couple nuances here that are probably worth illuminating. One is that teaching strategies gold data is collected in a very different way from any of the other assessments that we report out on, and it's definitely data that's not intended for an accountability purpose. So I just say that because when you bring it up, putting it in the achievement and accountability report is definitely far afield from what the designers of the assessment would have envisioned. But essentially it is an observational assessment where teachers are trained over a course of years to very carefully observe what's happening in their classroom and gather a portfolio of evidence into an online system so that they can then make an overall rating of the students' skills at certain points of the year across those different domains. And so it's not necessarily going to be aligned with the ISIL results, both because it's two different time points, but also because it's two different ways of gathering the data. And quite honestly, the meeting wildly held expectations in the literacy domain on teaching strategies gold is a lower bar than the 50th percentile skills on ISIL. And also, the exact literacy skills that are measured between the two tests are different pre-literacy skills. So it's a deceivingly apples and orange comparison.
Okay. All right. Oh, one other thing I just wanted to point that I was surprised was, and this was focus groups, so it's all dependent on who's there, right? But there seemed to be a real disconnect between perceptions from parents and the community perceptions. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. And I'm saying specifically around communication, concerns around communication and how we communicate as the early childhood programs from community, and parents seem very satisfied, or at least with what was written about communications. And there were a couple other places so what that said to me is maybe our communications issues are with community, Or it just, or it could be something else, but are there any observations? Because you do point out the disconnect between the two as to why that might be. And then, I heard there's 8 folks at the community session, so obviously that's an issue. It's going to be dependent on a small group of people.
Yeah, it was a small group. Only a few of them, according to the task force report, had any contact with the center. So I think it may be a communication issue that we need to look at.
But, it's an interesting challenge, because we can look at our data and see significant achievement and opportunity gaps for children, especially when they get to 3rd grade and go beyond. And when you look at those data, and whether this is the Sean Reardon data or our Achievement and Accountability Report or other ways of attesting, there's a significant gap. And so I honor the community members' voice that those gaps are not acceptable. And so we have to do something about that. At the same time, there's a level of satisfaction for the services and for the professionals who are in the center. And so it's the urgency that Rebecca started with is loud and clear, and that the achievement and opportunity gaps that we face, we have to do everything we can to be able to address them throughout our programming. But many kids are landing at kindergarten. Many kids are landing at pre-K here with those gaps evident. And so that's the level of urgency, is what do we do about that? And again, when we sat with the task force and we said, look, we've got a good program, we want to make it great. And for some, we may not have good enough program, and we want to make it great. And I think part of what we're arguing, and we can be a bit more succinct, but in terms of the alignment with the district, with paying attention to what assessments make sense, to pay attention to the recruiting of a diverse workforce. I think all of those component parts will actually start to make a difference in our multiple programs downstairs.
I just want to add that I think that this, in a lot of ways, when we looked at it, in its own way, represents in some ways a schoolwork planning process that schools do. So what this does is it does bring, the schoolwork planning process that that many of our schools engage in, brings together a lot of disparate data, right? So a lot of the reports or the analysis of the year. What we gain through this kind of a report is that the leader that's identified now for the program, and as the planning begins for next year, it gives some guidance and some real focus for the development of strategies. I would argue that given if we want to lift this program to be a more robust program, it needs this kind of coherence. And what this does is it really brings together these different components. A lot of times when they're not in this kind of a summarized thesis, it makes it a lot more challenging because you're going to constantly come at it from different locations. And having had the opportunity to sit in some of the engagement that happened this past year, some of the comments that were made at those sessions, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. Well, that's exactly why we do this kind of a process, is to bring together that crystallizing moment that you think, wow, if we could now just do this strategy. And so I think the question about urgency of strategy is absolutely correct. But that is, we are here at this point, and while people have raised this question over time, a report like this prepares the foundation for us to then now charge ahead. If we don't have this, then we're so often schools are saying, well, the person with the loudest voice gets the room, the person with the most money, unfortunately, or race determines what is the next focus area. And what this report does is it kind of cuts through that and it lays it out there and says, hey, here are the things we really need to pay attention to. And so I think that what we have is a certain rallying cry that once we've identified the leadership there, once, and not even once, it's embedded in this, is that planning process. Because when we looked at, should we include greater alignment with the schoolwork planning process, as you've heard discussed in terms of in our elementary schools and our middle schools, the answer was really no, because in a lot of ways this sets the foundation. We will now evolve to engaging that leader in more of the shared planning with the district, other school leaders in the district. We don't want to have that same separation again, but what this does is it gives that person a jump start in a way that I don't think has existed before and has been repeated lots of times. So I really appreciate the comments from the public and hearing this evening the sense of urgency. What I would say is that we are now because of this, in a more robust position to take on the charge that's required.
And I'm going to, again, echo your sentiments, and, so somebody who's coming from the early childhood world and a recent convert, because, again, once you get into the early childhood system and you learn about the way it operates and the complexity, you have these, like, light bulb moments, and you think about, wow, it's just so enlightening to see, because most of American education focuses on that K-12 piece. And we, for so long, have neglected, those very formative developmental years, when again, the science tells us that the brains and neurons all connect, and most of our brain is shaped by a few months, and within a few months. So it's critical that we get this right. And again, I agree with Rebecca, we got to get it right, starting with our 0 to 3 programs and our home visiting programs. And I'm glad to hear that we're going to look at other programs. And I've heard of, I've having had contact with some of the programs from 0 to 5. I know Baby Talk is like a really great, that it would fit into like our equity framework, because they're really, really intentional about having an equity lens in all the work they do. So that's one recommendation for myself as somebody who's in the field. Another recommendation is again looking at a birth to third grade continuity framework, right, to work off of. And so for the past 5 years, Illinois has been developing a birth to third grade continuity project, which was funded through federal Race to the Top funds. And what that does, so it takes all of those recommendations, and for the past 5 years they've worked, again, these are all issues that have bubbled up in other communities in regards to how to create this bridge from zero to third grade. Because again, we as a state have realized that there's been this gap and this focus on K-12. So again, looking at, the Illinois State Board of Education, along with Illinois State University, provides technical assistance to districts who choose to pursue a birth to through third grade continuity framework to address all of these concerns in regards to having a joint professional development for our pre-K folks with our K to third folks, looking at how we align data, aligning, leveraging community partnerships, transitions. I know some of and then there's some work that we're already doing that's incredible in this district. So I'd like to also see as a board member, what is some of the great stuff that's happening, with our Head Start programs, right? And how we engage parents through our policy committee and parent committee. How about some of the Evanston Cradle to Career work, where they have actually gathered, this was the second year they did this, but they gathered our pre-K teachers from across the different programs in JH with our kindergarten teachers, and had a pre-K kindergarten summit where they learned about each other's practices. That's something that's incredible that's going on, right? That we don't see in this report. But again, how do we assess what's already going right and is best practice, and how that'll impact the way kids do in regards to access and opportunity to achieve. So again, for me, it's great that we had this conversation again, and it was very enlightening for all people involved. Again, as Paul said, there is a discussion between the K-12 folks and the early childhood folks around, how much academics should we do, how much play-based learning should happen. I've learned that it's both. That again, a common saying in the early childhood world is, play is the work of children. So children have to play in order to learn social and emotional skills, how to get along, how to collaborate in groups. You learn mathematics through playing with blocks. You learn reading through in pre-writing by just grabbing markers and just scribbling. That is the foundation of what I think will help us close this opportunity and access gap that we have in this community.
A quick question for Raphael. The new ESSA reporting by site, is early childhood a part of that reporting requirement? So will early childhood have its own line on that kind of reporting?
I believe we have a choice. We can either report it as a separate site, or we can allocate a portion of the cost to our school sites. So I think in our case, because it's a separate location, we will be reporting it as a separate location.
So we'll
Yes,
see the
it's
per
own.
pupil
Yes.
expenditure
Mhm.
in a future
Yeah.
report
Mhm.
on a site, and that's a new thing that's coming, obviously. And then a question about Appendix F. There's the 5 essential data that was in here, and the component measures. Was this just staff that took the survey?
Yeah. The, although ISB doesn't require it, we've done the 5 essential teacher survey in the Early Childhood Center since we've been doing it in all of our other sites, and there's no pre-K child survey component.
So, and I think on page 77, I think that table about collaborative teachers is really telling them, because that's the voice of the teachers. And all of John Hattie's research that says that collective efficacy is the most impactful thing in the classroom. And to hear or to see that the staff rated collective responsibility 1 on a scale of 1 to 100, that's the staff working in the building, crying to be on the same page, working towards the same goal. And I think if the report in the task force doesn't give us enough onus to do something, certainly the teachers saying that they want to move in one direction together should be able to do that. And in all of those 5 measures, collective responsibility, quality, professional development, school commitment, teacher-to-teacher trust, and collaborative practices, they all rated themselves the lowest 2 categories of the possible 5 areas of rating. And I think the fact that that's them rating themselves as a staff says a lot about their honesty about the work and where they work, but also if you don't care, you probably aren't as honest, or you might get a different variance, but I think it says a lot that those are strikingly low ratings for the staff that they rated on the survey.
And I would just add, having had the pleasure to work with some of the teachers in our early childhood department, we have some of the best teachers, both in Head Start and Preschool for All. And I think that you bring out a really good point in that they're asking for help, and they're asking to be connected. And I think that oftentimes they feel that they're disconnected from the rest of our school district, not only in terms of just being heard, but curriculum. How do they connect to the curriculum? How do they incorporate the lessons in their classrooms so that their students are kindergarten ready? I think that there's an inconsistency in both of the programs. And also, Joyce, you brought up a really good point in terms of funding. One of the things that I think we could do a better job is ensuring that the funding ultimately benefits both of our, or all 3 of our programs. So the Family Center, Preschool for All, and Head Start. And I think that that's our charter work to ensure that we have the very best early childhood center, because we have all the resources and we have more than enough funding to do it. I think that we could definitely use more, but I can tell you that the reason why that center is how great it is because of the teachers. We definitely have a group of very committed teachers, and I think just to echo Joey's point is that they're asking for help.
I think that's a really powerful way of saying it, because the 5Es tell you that. The focus groups also tell you that too. And at least from as it was reported to us, and if you read the notes, there was a lot of energy. The vibe was very good. It was about a supportive learning community wanting to work together and wanting to work together even more so. So right therein lies the deep potential to get from good to great, or not good enough to great.
Yeah, I think the comments from the staff focus groups around the desire for more cohesion were definitely something that was striking to me. The other set of comments that were really striking to me were around the need for better assessments that don't focus so singularly on, like ISIL, on one component of literacy. So I think this could be a great opportunity. I know we've had a lot of discussions over the course of this last year around how and when we can look at the district's assessment policy and broaden our view of success to be more encompassing of some of the social and emotional learning goals that we have set and priorities that we have set. So while I know that that is a huge lift and not something that we can necessarily, take on within the course of the next year, I think taking this feedback that we've seen from the task force around the need for better assessments, at least at the pre-K level, could be maybe a good start in how we view that work. And I just want to say I love the idea of the birth to 3 assessment. I think that makes a lot of sense with the connectedness to the rest of the district that the report seems to be calling for. So I hope that is something that we can look into.
And yet, as you're not saying this, but as we move forward, where Joyce started, which was to set a goal to improve dramatically our kindergarten readiness, we will do that with the existing assessments. And then if we're going to morph into something new, we've got to make that transition transparent, so that it's not as though we're moving away from a goal of actually improving kindergarten readiness.
And I said this, I think, in some previous comments. I'm not suggesting that kindergarten readiness doesn't include a literacy component, or the literacy component we're currently using. It's about adding to, not taking away from. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I just want clarification on the goal for 23 to 24. How did we come up with that 5-year plan, and who's going to take charge of making the milestones for the next 5 years?
Well, I think that's going to be a combination of people that do that. Our new director, we're going to be working closely in assessment. We need to have some milestones in terms of how we're going to measure that. One of the things that we mentioned was a good evaluative piece so that we can look at progress closely. So this is, to us, kind of echoing what Andalib said, an important piece in looking at the overall plan as kind of our roadmap for how we're going forward with this. 5 years, our intent is to have it sooner than that, but we thought 5 years was the way to go.
Okay. I only ask because I want to ensure that our new director is being set up for success. So part of the challenge in hiring anybody who's going to take leadership is saying, this is what we need you to do versus what can you do? And what is the expectation for us to set up that person for success and not burn them out within the first year and then have an issue where we have a changeover in that director. So I think my main concern is ensuring that person knows what that chart of work looks like, and not having them in the position to develop that chart of work, especially because it's a very demanding job to come in and see this 125-page report, and you have to start work whenever that person starts. So I want to make sure that we're setting that person up for success from day one. And I know that we have a great team, and I know that that's the plan and the hope, but again, if I was starting this position, I would want to know what you expect me to do within the first year, what my expectation is.
Right.
And to not be in transition for 5 years, because I fear that could potentially happen, and I want to make sure that we're really taking advantage of this opportunity to change and improve our early childhood programs.
Right. Yeah. We hear you.
That's really, really helpful. I think if we look at the recommendation about focusing on the strategic plan, I can honor those who might feel frustrated, like, why isn't the strategic plan there, and why aren't we moving forward? In the transition, the voice of we're going to hire an expert who's going to come on in and do a lot of good work, and we have to support them in this role. And we didn't want to have the absolute plan already done to be able to hand that plan and say, now you're accountable for this. That person has to put their signature on that. And so that's the work that we'll do over time.
I just wanted to add, and kind of echoing Rebecca's points, is that, again, we sure don't want to set up anybody for failure. But again, we have to be very deliberate about ensuring that the responsibility is spread among the administration, right? And that it doesn't sit with this new director, early childhood director, as it won't sit with the Black Student Achievement, Director for Black Student Achievement, that we all expect, that there's collaboration going on with the literacy coach, talking to the EC director, talking to the Black Student Achievement director, and all of them supporting one another, and ensuring that there are spaces so they can collaborate and coordinate the way they deliver curriculum and services to our students and our families. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the early childhood world is that, again, there is this lack of knowledge, right? There is the lack of light bulb moments that we had at the task force, and what can we do to spread the knowledge, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. If we don't know what we don't know, then we're not going to act on it. And again, one of the pushes in the early childhood system in Illinois is to kind of try to educate, school boards. So there's programs out there that are recruiting folks. I know the Erickson Institute recruits. I know I have a fellow here, and we've been part of fellowships that again kind of helped us touch on on the complexity of the systems in early childhood. And it's a very beneficial experience to have in order to understand what we're tackling. And to move forward. So I would advise that, again, whatever we can do to educate our principals, for instance, right, on what to expect when they're when they're getting kiddos from our JH program into their kindergarten programs, what supports they should have for their teachers and the capacity that they should have in order to best serve those students coming in.
Thank you. I think that closes out our discussion of the early childhood report. And with that, I call this working board meeting adjourned at 9:25 p.m.
Okay, so it is 9:28 p.m. We will call the Board Finance Committee meeting to order. You want to roll call? Try to go through this as quickly as possible. Oh.
Cartha.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Chow.
Here. We've got a few action items and one discussion item on the agenda, and so given it's almost 9:30, we'll move as quickly as we can. In terms of the minutes, which is our first action item, the Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the April 9th, 2018 Board Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented.
Second.
Thank you.
Cartha.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Chow.
Yes. In terms of our action item for summer capital projects, I'll state the I'll state the motion, and then we can have the discussion, because there's several components to the summer projects that we want to review. So the Finance Committee recommends that the RFPs for the 2018 summer capital projects be presented to the full board for our approval.
Second.
Okay. So before we vote, Raphael or Kathy, are you going to lead this discussion?
The first one has to do with the asbestos abatement work that was supposed to accompany the secure entrance at ML King Art. It's also supposed to accompany the secure entrance at Washington Elementary School. And then just asbestos abatement at Haven Middle School, Walker Middle School. So the bid that was submitted was for $78,750, which compared to how much we budgeted came in at about $120,000 lower than what we had hoped for, what we budgeted for.
Well, that's good. Okay. So why don't we take any questions on the asbestos abatement first? I think we'll probably have more questions on the safe entry or double door entries. So is any questions on this? Okay. We don't have any questions on asbestos abatement.
So the other bid that we are recommending to the Finance Committee has to do with the safe entrance. In the initial budget, we had hoped to be able to do the King secure entrance for $200,000 to $250,000, but the bid actually came in at $405,000. And the one at Washington Elementary School came in right on. We were hoping to be able to do it for $240,000. It came in at $245,000.
So net with the savings that you just spoke of with.
So we're up about $33,000, $35,000.
33 to 35 over the initial projections. Okay.
So, but what I will say though, with those bids for the secure entrance, we are hoping to do value engineering. What that means is that we're going to negotiate with the highest bidder to be able to see if we can find some efficiency and some savings in the bid. So we're hoping that we wouldn't have to pay the $405,000 for the MLK project.
Has there been a significant, I guess maybe you could talk about each one of those projects and, you know, the scope of it initially versus where it ended up being and after stakeholder engagement? Is it related to that? Is there a different?
No, what it's related to is just timing, honestly, of the bidding. What we should have done is we should have taken this to, taken it out in October for bidding. And with the process of doing the capital project improvement planning and getting it approved in February, we were late to the market. So the economy is heating up right now. Construction is hot. People are doing work on the houses that they haven't done in a long time. So that has a lot to do with it. It's the timing. So for next year, for example, what we're going to try to do is try to make sure we get the approval earlier so we can go out to market in October, no later in November, and we should be able to get better pricing then. So we'll start the process earlier for Orrington, for Lincolnwood, and Rhodes, as far as the design for the secure entrance.
Would folks like, I mean, is there a way for you, we have the schematics and everything. But I'm not very good. I had a hard time understanding. If you could maybe visually or verbally just discuss the changes, especially in terms of if there's been a movement of, you know, I think at King Arts there was a shift from the entrances, and so big picture, what's changing?
What is changing is, as it stands right now, most of the traffic at King Arts come out, I believe, on the north side of the building. And what we are doing, we work with the PTA at King Arts, and we were fortunate to have an architect who was a parent of a student at King Arts. So there were two architects actually who were parents. They worked with the district architect to identify an entrance, which is south, where the locker used to be, and they made the decision that was a better flow for the building than what was initially proposed. And what we are then doing is we're going to relocate the lockers and provide a secure entrance that will include an office space for the assistant principal and a secretary there that will control the flow of traffic. That was what the community decided was the best option for them.
Okay. Are there any questions about the King Arts design or? And then in terms of Washington, is there?
Washington, it was the base design that we talked about, and that was what we went with. It was the main entrance of the school that faces Main Street. That was the one that is going to be reconfigured. It's going to be an additional entrance added in the front of the current entrance on Main Street, so that when you come in, you are just there in the vestibule, and someone is going to have to let that person in before they can go into the main wing of the building. So that was more straightforward than the one at King Arts.
Any questions about that? No? Okay.
Yeah, again, at King Arts, part of it, is building an office space on the south side of the building. We're on the north side right now, so on the south side of the building, next to where the doors will be.
Right.
Because if you enter the north side of the building, there's several pillars, the staircase, and then you have to go around, and that's where the office is. And you can buzz somebody in by cameras, but in terms of the sort of the secure entrance and being able to monitor people coming in, the thought was, after working with the architects and with the community members, to build that office space with the doors on the south side of the building.
Will office space still be on the north side as well,
Yes,
or
it
will
will.
everything be converted? It's just going to be the,
Yes, the office space will stay where the principal is right now, will stay there. There will be, with the secure entrance being done, where the locker room is right now, there will be a space for the secretary and an adjoining space for an assistant principal that will allow sightline for someone trying to come into the building to come into that building. King Arts has got 3 entrances right now, and those 3 entrances will stay open at the beginning of the school. So once school starts and the kids are dropped off, then the only entrance that will be able to be used will be the new secure entrance.
thank you. Okay, great. And then I think there's also the park school
And
project.
the other recommendation we're making is the park school playground. The PTA or park school, we're very grateful to them, raised $150,000 to build a new playground in park school. And we would love to have been able to finance, and as we're talking right now, we have a lot of capital needs, but just not enough money to be able to do that. So in doing that, initially, the PTA raised the fund, they engaged with an architect and also a designer to do the playground, except we have a different requirement that we have to follow. That is the health and life safety, since we are state-affiliated school district. So we had the district architect take the design that was provided by the original architect to make sure it complies with the life safety. I have an architect here, if you don't mind, if you can speak to that, please, to the work that we did.
Sorry, I'm not quite understanding.
If you can talk about the scope of work that we'll be doing for the playground.
Can you come up to the microphone over here, just so we...
Since we have you here, I'm pretending to be an architect here, and you're one. So-
My name is Carl Getz. I'm with Archon Associates. The low qualified bidder was Klaus Brothers Incorporated for a total of $191,640. And of that amount of money, I believe all or most will be paid for through the funds from the PTA. We should also remember that part of the $191,000 includes a $10,000 allowance, which is for unforeseen site conditions that might occur. So if we get lucky like we normally are, we don't have those conditions. So we would be saving $10,000 in that regard. Also, I believe the high school will be paying $8,000, as well as the school district will be paying $8,000.
For the demolition, to assist with the demolition of the existing ground.
Is that included in the 191, or is that?
That's not included in the 191. The bid that was submitted was only for the construction of the new playground.
Okay.
That was part of the $16,000, if you will, is our contribution to the project. So we reached out to the high school and asked them to meet us halfway to pay the $16,000 projected for the demo of the existing facility.
And also, we should mention that the $191,000 is for the construction. There's an additional cost of $22,890 for the cost of the play apparatus, which the school district will be purchasing separately and delivering it to the construction contractor.
And the school District 65 is paying for that?
Or is that going to be a joint?
No, it's in the
cost?
joint.
No, that's news to me.
No, that's not right.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand, what I'm trying to get at is so we're talking about 190,000, maybe that's 10 over.
Well,
Let's just
190, but that doesn't get
plus
us the playground?
22, or plus 23, so,
Plus 16.
well, the 16 at least. I'm trying to understand, you know, if the park school has raised 150,000, as you pointed out in your email, and we've already agreed to pay 16, that's fine, but now we still have, you know, 50, 60 some $1,000 that's unaccounted for.
The equipment, well, can we clarify?
Yeah, I need to clarify. My understanding in talking to Anthony Tremonte was that the total cost of the bid was $191,000.
That's the cost to construct the playground. There's an additional $22,640 or something. That's the cost of the play apparatus, which the school district will be paying for separately. We're thinking we're going to save money because if the contractor purchases the apparatus, they're probably going to add some additional cost to the cost of the play apparatus. Now, we should also mention that on Thursday, we're going to be meeting with the contractor and discuss possible ways to save money. Part of the bidding process included getting unit prices. For example, we're going to remove the existing wood chip safety surface and replace that with a poured-in-place rubber safety surface. So we have a unit cost of so many dollars per square foot for the poured-in-place rubber safety surface. So if we wanted to eliminate something, we could eliminate an area of rubber safety surface, and we know what that cost is per square foot. Also, the rubber safety surface is contained with concrete curb. So again, if we eliminate rubber safety surface, we would also then eliminate concrete curb, which we have a unit, a linear foot price on. So by meeting with the contractor on Thursday morning, we can review these perhaps alternate ways to save money. And we can, at that meeting, measure these areas and determine the actual savings.
Just to clarify,
yeah.
short $63,000 on the project,
Looks that way.
right?
Yes.
And,
So how are we?
and I just have to emphasize my position that, I mean, this is a playground at Park School, and it's wonderful that the PTA has raised as much as they have raised, and we have to find a way to close that gap so they can get their playground.
Yeah.
Like, this is a capital expenditure that I can't imagine we would be making any other PTA have to fundraise for a playground. And this is for a special needs population. I realize there's hoops and something's got to give here, but aside from not knowing all the numbers tonight, that just seems to be a sum of money that we need to find.
Can we go back to, because I don't know that I fully understood, or maybe I misunderstood. We're talking about the poured-in-place rubberized surface. You're suggesting not doing that as a cost?
The plan includes removing the existing wood chip safety surface and replacing that with a poured-in-place rubber safety surface.
Is that a more accessible option? Is that why it was chosen?
Right, so, yeah, we don't want to, we
don't
still
wanna
want to
change
do that. We don't want to change that, do we?
No, I mean, I think there's a functional, so I guess I agree with you. What I would recommend is, we're not in a position to move this forward, but the team needs to work with the park school team and understand if there's anything in this proposal, which is well over what they expected, that could go or could be changed that still meets the needs, because clearly the rubberized flooring is really important. That's critical for access. That's
very important,
right?
particularly to accommodate wheelchairs.
Exactly. So I don't, that's not some place where we can reduce costs, but there needs to be a discussion and with the team at Park, and our hats off huge to the amazing fundraising that you've done. This project we wouldn't be talking about it, because unfortunately we don't have money to do it unless without the work of the Park team, and quite frankly many of the PTAs and many schools across the districts that participated. This was a full Evanston project. So I think we need to have you guys need to have a discussion and meeting with the Park team about the proposal that we've gotten, the estimates relative to what was being expected, and if there's any way that we can reduce cost, have your Thursday meeting, and then come up with some options that the full board, just bring it to the full board, because we don't want to stop the work or slow the work from starting, but we're not in a position to make a decision on this right now.
What we're hoping is, once the meeting takes place between ARCON and the architectural firm or the contractor who's going to do the work, we're going to try to get some concession in pricing from them, if that's possible.
But I think it's important that we don't change the actual work without the discussion with the PTA.
Right,
to know what.
To be part of the meeting. The PTA is going to be part of the meeting on Thursday.
Okay, I didn't understand that. And I would also say, to the extent that we have options of reaching out to our partners at Park School with the ETHS, we've already reached out to them to contribute in the demolition costs. I mean, I agree, this is a pretty significant cost override, or, more than what we initially thought, but overrun, thank you, that's the word I was trying to, but I also feel the deep sense that to delay this would be heartbreaking and not something that I think any of us want to do. So if there's any options that we can, within our own budget, but also within reaching out to ETHS as a partner in the school to get this done. I think this would be the time to try to work something out.
I just think this would be an absurd conversation to have if we were talking about any of our neighborhood schools and not having a playground accessible for the kids.
Correct.
To play in. That would be a no-go, right? We would find a way to make it happen. And $191,000 seems to be a pretty high quote, given that it doesn't include the demo or the apparatus.
It does include.
The demo was $8,000 from 65 and 202 separately.
Oh, it is included in the 191?
That's not the 191. We are paying for that part. We are paying for that part.
Okay, so then it would be 16 minus
and
16.
possibly minus $10,000 too. More likely than not, it's going to be another.
Right.
$47,000.
So about 40.
Still, $50,000 that we're looking at needing to.
So if we can keep eliminating $10,000 every 10 minutes, we'll be fine by next week.
It's obvious that we need to go to the meetings this week with the park community members and architects and the contractor and see what we can do. And then we need to have a conversation with our colleagues over at ETHS and see what we can do. And then we can come back. I don't want to be insensitive to the needs, and Joey, your point is well taken, so registered. I hear it. The other side, just to put it on the table, and again, I don't want to be insensitive to our park families, but we do have $108 million of other capital changes that we have to do, and that's something that we have to always keep in mind as we look at the projects that we're doing, and there's a trade-off here. So even though this is significant, and so this is a significant curveball in the midnight hour, like many projects happen, but I think we also have to pay attention to the fact that if we make some compromises, we're going to be compromising other choices later on. We just have to know that that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and we have little places to come from because we don't have debt service that we can use. So it would be coming from operations.
It would be coming from operations.
And to Dr. Gorin's point too, there are also playgrounds all over the district that needed work on. We made the decision not to focus on that because we were trying to focus on what we consider to be critical.
Yeah, no, but I think the point that's being made here is there's this difference between bringing our current playgrounds, improving them or maintaining them better, and just having a playground that is accessible and usable. Those are two different things.
And I think too, just, from past practice, and I do understand that we are in a different financial position now, but, if another PTA had raised such a significant sum towards a project, I have a hard time believing that we would not find some way to complete the project. So I think it's important that we really use every option available to us and figure out, how we can work with ETHS, how we can, work with the contractor to reduce the bid. Maybe, if there are anything that can be, I don't pretend to know that if there's anything that can be cut from the needs, but this has been I've seen some of the fundraising that's happening. I feel like we need to make an exception and figure this one out. But I think we need to have more information before we can make the final decision.
I would pose it slightly differently with the same conclusion, that if we had 10 schools that had a $60,000 need, that's $600,000, and we can't spend $600,000. That said, because we don't have $600,000 to spend. That said,
right.
This particular playground has some very specialized equipment, specialized programming, and there's some safety pieces here that are really, really important as we move forward. And so I can see making the exception here. I want to just be a little careful to say that we're in the business of making exceptions all the time.
No, I think that's fair enough, and I think that that's something that we can look into, future policy around how we accept, donations from PTAs and whatnot. But I think in this instance, because we have sort of had this practice up till now, and because this is, I think, a really special and unique situation, that I think we have an obligation to do what we can to make sure that the project gets completed.
I mean, there is also the option, I'm sure the fundraising team doesn't want to continue, but we can we could make an agreement to float the money now while some continued fundraising comes in, right? And maybe that can be part of the discussion, knowing that there was one assumption around what it was going to cost to get it done, and given prevailing rates and what we have to do, it's a different situation now. So, try to be creative to make sure the project happens, but maybe there's a way that we could share in that cost going forward, given future fundraising.
We will. I spoke to the president of Park PTA, Ms. Gumin.
Also a Phyllis Ganser Award.
And I made a commitment to her that we will work together to make sure this project comes to life. When I called her this afternoon to tell her that. So we're committed to making sure we appreciate the work they did, raising all that money, and we will do what is necessary to make sure it comes. I said that to her, so we will work to make it happen.
Okay, well, there you have it. Do any of you all want to say something? Or any comments, questions? Don't feel to...
Please come to the microphone.
Sure.
I'm Julie Cutter. I am part of the fundraising team. I also work to build Noah's Playground, which is also an accessible playground here in Evanston. And both the equipment vendor that we intend to use for Park and the contractor were contracted by the city of Evanston to build Noah's Playground, so they have a track record. The equipment vendor also has other playgrounds in Evanston with their equipment. But, so yeah, Raphael, we did not get to talk, but I know that they did. So we came immediately from the bid opening, and I reached out to Klaus Brothers, really to try and understand why there was such a discrepancy in the bid. And I won't go into all the details, but there were just a number of misunderstanding on our part as a lay group of people, just fundraising, versus requirements that the district had. The $10,000 bond, we feel very comfortable and appreciative that, we don't really have to worry about covering that. But, for example, when we met with the contractor last summer, his knowing that these were private funds being raised, he worked under the assumption that he would be able to bill labor at union wage, and then, of course, when the bid requirements came, it was prevailing wage. So things like that really added up. There are also a couple technical aspects that he had gone under one assumption, and when the bid documents came, there was another assumption. And this is why I called him immediately, tried to understand to the best of my ability what the discrepancies were, and we set a meeting for Thursday. So we are praying that that holds, because we know that there's this May 22nd final board meeting. One big piece that I know Anna and Raphael discussed today is a very large, to the tune of about $20,000 discrepancy for the rubberized surfacing. And that, again, not to go into all the detail, was a function of how it was bid out. Our assumption was that we were going to purchase that from the equipment vendor. In the end, the way the bid document was structured, it became the responsibility of the contractor. The contractor basically purchased it from the equipment vendor and then marked it up. So there's already been discussion as to whether that is something we could extract from the contractor and rebid, and there are legal questions to that. There's the question, does the contractor say, well, if you take half my contract off, do I still want to do the contract? So there are just a number of if-then scenarios that we are trying to hash out, as quickly and efficiently as possible, but accurately too. And I just am really hopeful that after this Thursday meeting, some of these questions will be answered. So I hope, and then just to address, so our understanding, when we first were told that both District 65 and 202 would each give $8,000, that was a meeting with Joyce last summer. It was originally thought to be an in-kind, basically to cover the cost of certain demolition. My understanding is a conversation that was had between Anna and Raphael much more recently. They said that that would just be a cash transfer. So that $16 is not only incorporated into what we have raised so far, which is now just over $155, but it's also just passed through the contractor as if he's doing the work. So just to clarify, we are at $181 if you walk off the $10,000 bond. We're at about $23,000 for the equipment. We've raised about $155, and we have a lot of potential out there. I'm going to close with this. My view again with this, what could be a $20,000 discrepancy in the way the poured-in-place surfacing, it would be wonderful if the district could pay for it. I also think as a taxpayer, if it was a bidding error, and with kind of due respect to the donors who've been so generous, to just make up that $20,000 without trying to rectify an overbid is just not the proper way to go about managing that money. At the same time, we have worked really, really hard, and these kids need a playground, and we're not, we are in no way conceding that we're going to put this on hold or cut the project down. So, not brief, but thank you.
No, thank you.
Hi, and I'm Stephanie Kimmel. I have no connection to Park other than being a community member who saw this real inequity, and I'm a fundraiser by profession, so I've been helping, and the community support has been really incredible. It is hard to, people don't know that Park School exists. Their PTA is small and mighty. Anna has been just doing an amazing job. There are still proposals pending. The Booster Club, the boosters at ETHS are considering it at their board meeting today, I guess. And there's a fundraiser on the 20th at Temperance. There is still money coming in. Mr. Halpern, I think, echoes exactly what I think. This would be just a huge loss if the board couldn't accept this, amazing gift that the Park PTA has raised this money to make an accessible playground for some of the most vulnerable kids in our community. You know, fitting in with the equity initiatives around African American students, I believe the percentage of African American students at Park is over 50%, and low income is also over 50%. So, yeah, I would really urge the committee and then the full board to approve moving forward with this project. I think you can make it happen.
Let me just, thank you both for the comments, and Julie, I appreciate the nuances of all the bidding, and the prevailing wages are things that we're obligated to follow as a public institution. And so, but the piece that's most important to me is that we'll work in good faith, and we'll be at the meeting on Thursday. We'll come back, we'll roll up our sleeves, and we'll see what we can do.
And we'll negotiate with the contract, the winning bidder, in good faith to try to figure out a way where we still can abide by the requirements of health and life safety and still provide what is needed in the way of the playground. So we would do that.
And since we hadn't expected to have full board approval until the board meeting, it's okay if we do it then, we'll just bring it out of consent agenda and do it then. So it will in no way delay the project. We just want to have, you know, what the final answer is at that point. So.
Right, because technically we're in committee right now.
Technically we're in committee, even though it looks like we're not. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you all so much for everything and for being here and for answering speaking to it, because that really helped, Julie. Okay, so our next agenda item, oh, so I guess we have to, because these are all bundled, we made the motion to forward it on. Is there any, do we need to make a change to the motion? Or can we forward them all on to the full board and then we'll just treat it separately? Yeah.
I think we can, because if you look at the narrative in there was a line that says contingent on the funding, whatever the funding is.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we will, so then we just need to vote since we had a second, just.
So, Cartha?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Chow?
Yes. Okay, motion carries. So, I don't know why I lose these things. Okay. Building use fees is the next action item. The Finance Committee recommends that the building use fees for FY19 be presented to the full board for approval. Have a second? I don't have a second. Are there, committee members or anyone else here have questions about the building use fees proposal?
I just had a quick question about, you know, I'm fine with increasing the fees. I was wondering if we could know how much, you know, from what we're increasing and how much, like what a percentage increase it is. And then I have a recollection from previous discussions that our building use fees don't actually cover the entire cost of the building use. And so if the district is subsidizing, do we have any idea of how much?
So let me start with the second question. Yes, the rental fees do not cover the entire cost of custodial costs or utility cost. There's about, we collect about $40,000 in rental fees, but our costs are close to $100,000 or more. So there is a deficit, and that's the reason why the schedule of the rental fees, these are for district facilities that are being used by the community organizations and District 202, Village of Skokie, City of Evanston, why it's looking a little bit different. We collapsed some of the groups and we made some changes to how we will be charging those fees. And just to give you a couple highlights, for example, with the not-for-profit groups, we split them into two under this schedule, and all the groups that serve our students at no cost, they get a free use of our buildings except for the cost of the custodian if there is a special setup required. So we're not making any money, we're just simply covering the cost of a person who's there, who's doing a cleanup. but other not-for-profits and religious organizations, and also those organizations that do charge our students, they will have a schedule now of fees, and will have to pay fees. So we are hoping it's a different, maybe not necessarily a big increase, but just a different setup of those fees, and we are hoping that this way we can charge more or different organizations or businesses and bring more money.
To Suni's point, what is the current versus the new pricing? And
So it's not really fixed. We actually went back because what we did in prior years, we were increasing the fees by the costs of living. And so these costs are a little bit different because we felt that the old costs were outdated. We actually went back to our budget. We looked at our utilities. How much are we spending water, electricity? We divided it by square footage, and we did the same thing with labor cost. So these may look different. I don't want to throw percentages because they won't really make sense. And I mean, we can bring percentages next time if you feel that you need that answer. But this is a completely different structure if you look, and we feel it's more fair because we are trying to recoup the actual cost.
So to kind of, when I got here, what I looked at what a fixed cost, what a variable cost, which in the past we didn't do that. So we looked at the average cost over the last 5 years of operating a utility cost, our water cost if they're using water, heating cost of what that is, and also the variable cost of custodian. What's the average cost of that? And we then rolled that up into one and came up with a square footage rate, which we've never done that before. So I couldn't tell you where the number before came from, but this is how you're supposed to do facility cost. How much it really costs you, fixed cost plus variable cost.
Got it.
So I think it's great that we're making it a number that actually relates to something. I do think it would be helpful, and maybe this is, bringing it to, just as a FY or adding it to the board meeting, is to know for a given organization how different is it going to be? Because even though it's right, I mean, I have no frame of reference if we're saying, this is a huge increase for someone or nothing, it helps to have a frame of reference as to what we would have charged previously to the point.
So maybe we can get some examples of some
that would be helpful.
auditoriums and how much the new cost is versus the old cost.
Yeah, so if you can just include that with the version that we approve in consent, and then if someone has a question or concern about it, we can pull it out. Is that okay with you, Suni?
That's okay. And
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for the question for me is like, are we going to be discouraging use? Because we're such an...
We were trying to be mindful of, all we were trying to do is cover our cost. We weren't trying to make money, but before we weren't sure we were covering our cost because there was, I mean, you have to look at your cost basis, and that's cost basis of accounting is what we use this time. How much is actually really costing us for those fixed costs?
And I think it's important.
The variable cost, depending on the average rate that a custodian makes, how high up the custodian that they will be using for setup and cleanup is scheduled to make, that's the variable part of the cost. So we rolled that up into it to come up with an average.
And to note that, we're still not charging the full to City of Evanston or
no, we are not charging
PTAs like that. No. We don't charge, and we're still not going to charge.
No, we're not, because they're working with our kids.
Right.
So if they don't provide that service, we have to provide those services to our kids.
So
if possible, it might be helpful to show over the last 2 years or 3 years how much we've collected in fees and then what we speculate we're going to get this year with the new rates, just to be able to show that in comparison and also show that that's still not 100% of the overall cost. So just a comparison point. We can do that.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and let's vote.
Cartha?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Chow?
Yes. So moved. Okay, so, we have one more action item. The Finance Committee recommends the treasurer's bond renewal for FY19 be presented to the full board for approval.
Second.
Okay, this is something we do every year?
Yes, we're required to do by the state of Illinois. What it is if you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, in case of default and theft, you have to insure the treasurer who has responsibility for writing checks. So in case something happens, then the insurance company will reimburse the board, the district less the deductible amount. So it's required by state to do that.
Thanks, Raphael. Okay, so assuming there's no questions to that, let's just have a vote.
Cartha?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Chow?
Yes, so moved. All right, our discussion item is the budget update. We love budget updates at 10:15.
And we gotta be brief because it's after 10. We actually only have 6 slides.
Oh, yay.
So you
Good job,
have to hear
Kathy.
that. And we would like to update you where we are with the budget development. This is a quick outline. We're going to be talking about equity lens. Actually, Mr. Abafemi will be talking about this. We give you a brief overview of the evidence-based formula, how it's going to affect our budget next year, as well as the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and then talk about, as always, about uncertainties with the state and federal funding. So FY19 budget, the work really started in January, is being developed around district priorities, and in order to ensure that these priorities, instructional priorities, are implemented successfully, district has made some investments, strategic investments, and is adding in positions of executive director of Black Student Success. Equity coach is also adding a position of community school coordinator, and it's adding 2 instructional coaches in order to implement a one-to-one program at its middle schools. I want to point out that all of these positions were included in our February projections. So they were in the numbers in February. Our student enrollment is driving staffing needs, obviously, and we have increased enrollment in English language learners this year. We will be adding 2 positions, one at Walker and one at Chute. We also have increased enrollment in Nichols next year and at Haven, so we will be adding a net of 3.5 FTE there. We've been using, this is, I believe, our 4th year, zero-based budgeting budgeting for non-personnel expenditures, and what it means is basically going line by line in every department's budget, sitting down with program managers and, asking tough questions. I mean, is that something that you need next year? I mean, so Raphael and I, we've been doing it again this year and trying to achieve efficiencies. At the next meeting in June, when we will bring the draft tentative budget, we will also share with the committee the list of efficiencies. There will be quite few. Raphael has been working very, very hard with our various vendors on bringing the prices down. We're going to be talking about reshifting resources. That's one of the ways to make room to eliminate, I don't want to use waste because it's not a waste, but just getting the same services by squeezing and working with our vendors. And
if I can interrupt that, but we have to be very frank in that we're just cutting around the margins. Efficiency in non-personnel is cutting around the margin because 80% of the expenditure that we have in the district is related to personnel. So the only way that I feel we can actually realize some substantial savings will be to look at class size. I'm just being very honest. Because we can cut as much as we can in non-personnel, the impact is not going to be significant. I mean, we're doing this to show that we are being responsible with the way we manage money, but if we want to see substantial savings, we have to look at class sizes. I just wanted to point that out.
In terms of over the long term?
Yes, over the long term,
Not
yes.
this coming year.
Not for this coming year, but if we look at, in the out years, and if we look through the years that we talked about with the referendum, at year 8, we will be significantly, we will need to do some significant changes before year 8, so that we don't have to go back and ask for another referendum.
And now Mr. Obafemi will talk about the equity lens that's being used in the budget development process.
So currently, the way we are doing the budget with equity lenses, we're trying to match the requirement in the budget with that of the strategic design of the district. We're looking at the achievement data of students, and if we felt like there are certain students who needed more resources to be successful, we're trying to match those resources to the students. And in a way whereby the kids who need more to be able to do better, they get the resources that they need. For example, last year as well as this year, we invested in equity coaches, for example. We also invested in ELL because we know the students that we have who are English language learning, they need that additional resources. Now, in order for us to take it to the next level, we believe what we really need to do is look at SBB. Because what SBB does, it provides a framework of equity. And the way that will work is we'll come up with a per student funding for each child. We decide what it is that each child needs to be able to get a good education. And on top of that, what we'll then do is we'll lay on an amount for students who deserve or need additional resources. For example, we know our special needs students, they need additional resources to be able to function depending on where they are. LRE1 students, they need some additional resources to be successful because the majority of their time they spend in gen ed classes. LRE2, they do some pull-out with those, so they need that much more. We have to provide them more resources in addition to the base funding for them to get the resources they need to be able to be successful. Then we have the LRE3, and LRE is least restrictive environment, which is a term that you use in special education. So LRE3 tends to be students who are in self-contained classes. They receive the majority of their education in special ed classes. So because of that, the cost of educating those children is more expensive because they get special need teachers, they may have speech pathologists, they may have an OTPT, so they have an array of resources that we have to budget for in addition to the base amount. And then we also have students who are bilingual. In addition to the base amount, then we provide them ELL resources to be able to augment what they need. That, in our estimation, is how we can achieve equity because every child gets a base funding and then we lay on based on what they need to be successful. For example, we know it costs more to educate middle school students than it does to educate elementary school students because you have divisions, you have more departments, you have more teachers that will educate those kids. So that's where we're going as far as the run to equity to be able to get to where we need to get to. But the fact of the matter is, as it stands right now, there are certain schools where the students get more allocation of funding than other schools. And it's just been the way it's happened over time. Now, if we are talking about we want to achieve equity, then we have to start looking at that and have a formula in place. And the way you do that, as I said before, is you do a student-based budget, and you have a rationale for giving additional resources to each student depending on their need. That, to us, is the definition of equity. If we decide to do that, those schools or those students who've received additional funding over time, they will have to give up some of that funding so that the funds actually follow the children as opposed to the school. So we have to be ready to be able to deal with the blowback, the political blowback of that, because folks who've enjoyed an advantage based on certain school that they go to, they will protest vehemently. But if we're serious about equity, that's the way we have to do it. Base funding for every child, children who need additional resources to be successful, we have to give it to them. Whether it's special needs students, whether it's English language learner, whether it's Black children who may need an additional reading coach to be able to get them to where they need, we have to provide those additional resources. So that's where we're going. We probably won't be able to do that this year, but we are hoping to start introducing that for the 2020 budget.
Do we have current state information? Because so that these disparities exist and
We've actually
I guess
done
a hypothesis
analysis.
regarding
I'll
where
be
they...
happy to share it with you.
I'm sorry?
We've done analysis
Right.
of each school.
I
And
think that's what I'm getting to. I mean, I know there had previously been
Beginnings of that.
some analysis. I don't, so this is obviously sensitive information, but I think it's important as we try to be, as we're transparent about making shifts, we have to have an education process about where we are today and start with that. And so that as we look at what needs to change, we have a shared understanding of where we are. And so understanding that we might not be making those shifts for a year, I think we should be working now on starting to provide public information. And as you pointed out, it'll be, required soon, or at least by school, but we can get ahead of that and start sharing information, transparently about where there might be differences. And there's probably some very valid reasons why there are, based on equity work that we've already done, or maybe there isn't, but we need to start sussing that out.
I think deep dives will be part of our discovery process, and we're working on it with Afton partners. So we getting this data together.
we've
And
done some
we're going to be
preliminary
required, we're going to be required by the state in 2019, 2020 to be able to do this school by school. So part of what my colleagues are talking about is the early work that we're trying to do to understand where we are, what our baseline is, so that we can actually be proactive in this rather than being reactive.
So that's what ESSER asks us to do, and that's the whole thrust of site-based budgeting. It's an attempt to create transparency about how funds are spent per children, because people know there's inequity. A lot of time, the school where folks have the louder voices tend to have more resources than the folks who don't have the voice.
Can you just give me an example of that?
Example of a building,
Just an example of a school that is getting resources because of the loud voices.
give me a second. I actually have the analysis here. So, for example, if we look at our school, we broke our schools down from the highest per student expenditure to the lowest one. So the highest one right now as it stands is Shoup Middle School. The preliminary data that we have from our deep dive shows a per student weighted cost of $17,261 per child. And on the other end of that will be Kingsley with $12,416 per child. So, but there are reasons why that would be the case.
Right.
We have to look, for example, how many special needs students are there? How many of those are LRE 1s? How many of those are LRE 3? And because on average it costs about $90,000 to educate an LRE 3 students. So you have to go in and aggregate all that data.
Right, but my question is that it sounds like there is opportunity hoarding happening at individual schools based on your comment that when parents yell, they get more resources. And I'm just curious as to what an example of those resources that are being hoarded are.
We have preliminary data. I'll be happy to share with you once we refine that data. But if you look at it, they have variances. But what we're trying to do, we're trying to find out the reasons why those variances exist. And in order for us to do that, we have to pull out certain things. We have to pull out the makeup of the student population.
Right. Understood.
How many bilingual students do we have? How many special needs students do we have? What are the range of services? Are they basic special needs services? Are they?
I understand. I think that my comment is really that I feel like comments like that are rather divisive. And I feel like it would be great to have that data first, then unpack and say that it looks like, based on the data, that there's some unfairness in that it's inequitable, versus just coming to that conclusion in public before being able to unpack that data.
I'll be happy to share that data as we get more refined figure.
Thank you.
And I think where you're underscoring is important, which is that there's a variance depending on the site. And so we need to unpack that and explain what that is, so that we can have the type of conversation that is fruitful to move forward.
So I guess in general, I just probably say, as we're looking at the calendar for next year, we can think about bringing this type of information ahead of the actual budget process for the following year, but, you know, to discuss in finance and understand what the nuances are, because it also may validate that there is some work, our equity work has allocated resources to certain places that it should go, and not being the same to other places, so.
I just want to note, though, that I think, you know, if I'm understanding this correctly, this is our district's attempt to kind of create our own evidence-based funding model, looking really specifically at what we see based on our data are the needs of students. And special needs, bilingual, low income, and I think I heard you say this, but I do think, you know, if we look at where the largest and most persistent historical gap is, it's around our Black student achievement. So I think that we need to include Black students as, into looking at resource allocation specifically. So it's in line with the racial equity work that we have been doing for years. So I think that's just something that is worth highlighting, and that's really exciting to me that we are going to start looking at our budget that way. And I'm fascinated to see when we're ready to have that deeper dive and to look at that data. I think it's a really exciting process that we're embarking on, so thank you.
And if I can add one thing for a future topic, because it's at this late hour and we wouldn't do it right now anyway. I think, and Paul, you mentioned, in 8 years, if we're where we are today, there will be some tough decisions to be made. And we just got through a window of that a couple of years ago, or a year ago. And I think it would be really wise of this board now, in the next couple of years, to spend a couple of these finance committee meetings or open workshops talking around what are some big things that could be done to change the trajectory financially when we're not under the pressure to make a decision by X date, when we can think clearly, when we can take in community feedback and hear the educators' ideas around, if we had to make a decision today, even though it's 6 years out or 8 years out, this is what we think we can do strategically and plan for that would, be least impactful to the educational experience of kids.
The generosity of the voters in Evanston and Skokie allows us to think about this over an 8-year period. It's somewhere in about year 4 where expenditures exceed revenues. And so we're only in year 1, and so we have to, so the conversation needs to be had soon, now, soonish, next year, the following year.
The emotions come into play in year 3.
Right, in year 3 or 4. And again, this is where the board has put a stake in the ground and said, the resources that we have from the referendum will be used over those 8 years, and so we will put them into fund balance to be able to do that. But if we're really being prudent with our financial management, we will look at these issues and concerns even way before the 8 years.
We still have a couple slides.
Yeah.
Yes, please,
Okay.
move on.
So I just want to, we have one slide on the new legislation, actually legislation passed last year, and the impact on the current budget. So evidence-based formula, it's the new formula, it's the new way of funding education by the state. It replaced general state aid and poverty grant. The state no longer is just looking at the attendance and the poverty figures. They are actually looking at the individual needs of students. As Rafael mentioned, they're looking at the ELL student population, special needs students, and low income, and they formulate adequacy target, and our target is 96%, which is actually very low for a geographical area. If you look at North Wilmette, their adequacy target is 136%, ETHS 134, Skokie 68, 112. They will be recalculating that target every single year, and I'm sure it's going to be higher next year because our referendum funds will be funded. They are not funded in the FY17 data because the evidence base is being based for FY18 is being based on the FY17 data. We will be getting approximately 8.2 million, and 216,000 is the new money. The state allocated approximately 350 million of new money, and districts who are in tiers 1, 2, 3, we are in tier 3, getting some money. The majority are probably around us are not getting anything. Some school districts are getting a few $100s, but I know Morton High School is getting almost $10 million. So, I mean, it really varies depending how much of local resources they are. Raphael mentioned a student-based funding, or ESSA. We are actually lucky because the majority of our general ledger is already coded to individual locations. We will be required, as Paul said, to have FY19 data sent to the state, presented to the state in September of 2019. And actually, there's already regulations out there. All the centralized expenditures, superintendent's office, business office, transportation, janitorial services, we will have to create spreadsheets and probably allocate certain things to all 70 buildings and transmit that data to the state. So our taxpayers, our community members will be able to look per building and per student spending online, because that's how the FY19 student report card information will be presented. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty with the state funding. That did not change. That's why we did not even include the extra money in the budget, because state hardly ever pays. I mean, and if they do, they pay on their own terms. But they've been paying. And we're going to have some good news for you in June, because they've been paying late payments, categorical payments. Some of the categoricals are now included in evidence-based funding. Personnel, you will no longer see it as an item in general ledger. Bilingual education, no longer a separate item. And the same thing goes for extraordinary. But again, we don't know what's going to happen if FY19. We are assuming a flat funding. State is saying that we should not be getting less money than what we received in prior year unless our enrollment drops. And we're projecting a stable enrollment. There are still big unknowns related to pension cost shift. We do have an amount in our projections, but governor's proposal called for 10% increase. We do not have that in our projections, so if that comes to fruition, we will have to increase it. Also, property tax freeze. There's at least 6 different bills, or maybe 8, on a property tax bill. They're talking about 2017 levy, 2018 levy. They're talking about a freeze for school districts that have 50% fund balance. I mean, luckily, we're not in that group because our fund balance is barely 20%. But it looks like it's a very popular topic in Springfield. So, I mean, I hope it doesn't come to fruition, but it does. That's going to be a huge pressure on our finances going forward, because we lose that money forever. And then, of course, the federal funding. In Trump's budget, the Title II funds are currently cut. We have to wait and see if that stands. If not, we've been funding our professional development with those funds. So again, this is a question, big question mark if we continue fund our professional development at the level that we did, and if there's room in our local funds to do it. Also Medicaid, we've been doing a phenomenal job with reporting our teachers, our psychologists, our staff, but the state is not paying. because the state is sitting on that money. So they are holding approximately 1 million of our funds. And again, it's a big question mark. We don't know what's going to happen in the future.
And the other variable too, if I could, even though we're expecting this money, the EBF funding from the state, none of it for subsequent years has been allocated. So it's a very good possibility it may not be allocated in subsequent years to 100% of the base. So it may be prorated. And if it's prorated, the school district with a targeted adequacy rate of 1 and 2 will see the money before it rolls up to 3 and 4. So those are things we have to keep in mind as we do projections.
Yes. And this is a final step, and just to give you the next steps, at the next finance meeting, we will be talking about our draft tentative budget at the very high level, and then in August, we will have a tentative budget and adoption of the budget in September. So that's what we had for you tonight.
Great, thank you. Oh, there we go. All right, well, thank you both for the update, and unless there are any other questions, we have our next meeting June 4th for the Finance Committee. I will say the meeting's adjourned at 10:36 p.m. Thank you.